Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our study session. Due to traffic, we have waiting for some of our presenters. So we're going to go ahead and, in order to expedite through the agenda, which is quite long, or at least will take some time, we're going to move to the item number C, the Charter Review Committee discussion. So, anybody have any issue with that?
No.
Okay. Moving along? Thank you. Okay. Michael?
Thanks, Mayor. So this was...
Do you have an issue with the moving the agenda?
Oh, Jim has an issue. Jim?
Looking at the changes that were given to us a couple of weeks ago, I'm not convinced that a charter commission is worthwhile going. I think that the changes are so minor that we can do it in a process other than going to a charter review commission. The only advantage to me to go to a review commission is if they are allowed carte blanche to look at every aspect of the charter and not just those suggested changes. Otherwise, I'm not in support of a charter review committee.
Your call. You can certainly broaden it.
Well, I think the intent here is that if we did decide we were interested in doing a committee, we wouldn't have the committee formed and up to speed and ready to go with the depth of work that's going to need to be done, the due diligence on the charter in order to have anything on the ballot for 2013. So right. The committee would actually be working towards a 2014 ballot initiative. The ballot changes or the charter changes that we have in front of us now are the ones we would consider, that we still would consider, just this council will determine whether or not they would go on 2013. So this is really more future.
And if the council desired, you would just remove that section of Section 5B or modify it to address Councilman Taylor's concern.
Bruce.
Which one?
You.
Okay.
Bruce Solomon.
Thank you.
You.
Yeah. Present. Well, all I was going to say was, 5B, so you went there anyway, but 5B said the charter should be reviewed in its entirety with openness to input from all citizens. However, the following issues should be given particular consideration. So, I read it as those four items were, focal points, but it pretty much was carte blanche. So there.
Page 44.
Yeah, 5B.
Yeah, Michael, I don't see how 5B would apply, why that would be removed.
Well, if Councilman Taylor was concerned that it was focusing them, you could remove it. No, it's certainly, we're saying they should review it all. And the idea in putting this forward after the council's discussion on this was really to, in some respects, take a little bit more time and thought in potentially changing what is our local constitution and not having it be rushed through because we're on a fairly short timeline right now, but really have some level of comprehensive review by a group of citizens that you all would put together. If there's not a need that you feel for it, then you certainly don't need to do it. And if you think that it would have value at the end of the day, sometimes it's careful what you wish for type of thing when you open up this kind of request to them. But right now we've got just a limited focus and limited number of comments, and I'm not sure that you guys have all read through the charter and really taken your own look at it and whether or not that's something that you guys want to do or you guys want to delegate to a group of citizens. So the concept was kind of the more standard norm out there is to create a committee who would do that on your behalf and then make those recommendations to you. And then obviously, the way it's been crafted is the council is under no obligation and can take with it what they so choose.
Bruce?
I'm in support of the idea of what's in this resolution. I think it's important to get citizen input, and I think this is an area that I know does have some areas that need to be touched on. What better place than to have it come from a citizen group rather than just council?
Peggy?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that we're addressing several different issues here. So did I understand that we're thinking to go ahead with the issues that were already raised, to put those on the ballot?
We've had 3 items right now that council has directed us to work on. One is Section 27 of the Charter, and the other are the 2 ballot measures, one for taxation of the lodging, and the other is the retail marijuana taxation.
Right, but I'm asking just about the charter right now.
That-
So were we thinking, as you had talked previously, about the kinds of issues that former city attorney and I had gathered over a year or two, to group those, let's say, in just the grammar clarification piece, then a couple of other types of things? Are we thinking to put those on?
I was thinking that this would be in place of that if council wanted to put parts or all of what you have put forward here, which is what Councilman Taylor alluded to, then we could do it. But we have taken no action in that direction.
Because the substantive things I could see waiting on and letting a committee also think through those. But just cleaning up some of the language, which is not substantive, maybe mechanical or grammatical or whatever, it seems to me to hold those and put them on another ballot with major content, substantive issues, might make it more difficult for people to see them in the different ways that they are. So I would like us to do the little easy kinds of cleanup things this year. And I would support having the charter committee, a citizens committee, but I think 11 is too many. One thing, scheduling 11 people frequently can be a challenge, but I personally would like to see 7, with each council member just choosing one, each of us choosing one, and having just 7. And I'd rather have the council that is in office in November do the appointing, because as we know, if we don't agree with all that's said, or we think that they're having difficulties and we want to reconstitute or whatever, then the council that's appointing them would be interacting with each other rather than picking one now and we know we will have at least one change on council. So anyway, so I like this general concept. I just would like to delay implementation till November and have only 7 members.
Any other comments? Jerry?
On page 2 of this, on, let's see, what is that number? Well, page 2, going down to 4B, number 2. Section 4B, number 2.
Yep.
Yeah. Are we eliminating a lot of folks? But in the second sentence of that paragraph where it says, the at-large members, and I'm not sure what that's talking about, shall, by education, experience, or training, come from a field of the law, academia, or public administration / policy. So are we eliminating a bunch of folks if they don't?
You could be.
Yeah, I think we would be.
Or you could certainly, so the at-large are essentially the ones appointed by proposed to be appointed by the full body of the council. So you could remove that sentence if that was your desire.
I would prefer to remove that sentence.
Everybody okay with that?
I'm not. To me, if you're going to get a group of citizens who are going to look in depth at our charter increasing the number, to me, would be more important than decreasing the number that was suggested. And I think that you need people from various aspects of their experience to put this together. And so I would prefer that you go to like 17 members on a charter commission. I don't think that's too many. And you can have each council person elect 2, and then the rest of them be at large. But I
Other
think it's
comments?
important to have different expertise on the charter commission if you're going to look at the whole charter.
Was that a comment on the number that I had mentioned?
On your elimination of the second one, and that was part of the comments. The other part of the comment was Peggy's reducing it to 7 members.
Well, let's stick to one thing here. What are we doing then?
Peggy'd like to see it go to 7. I think that you would agree. You agreed with that,
I will
Jared?
agree with that.
And Jim would like to see the number increased. Was 17 a random number, or?
No, it's a planned number. 17 gives each counselor 2 appointees plus 3 at large. It will be selected by the 7 counselors.
Bruce?
Generally, I think you're better off maybe with, I kind of liked 11. I didn't have a problem with 11. I think that's a good number because it's got, you're likely to get some substantive input. I go back to when we, a number of years ago, had, for example, the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, and I think we had people involved with that had a finance and budgeting background because there was specific level of expertise. I kind of think this is sort of in the same vein. I mean, what you've got in here, in terms of people familiar with law, public policy, so forth and so on. I mean, there are levels of expertise that can be brought to bear on a document that is constituted as a city's charter. And so I personally didn't have a lot of problem with 4 sub B sub 2 the way it was written.
Bill?
Concur.
Peggy?
So we have 7 council people, who have absolutely no requirement of any of those sorts to be on council, and yet the citizens seem to usually pick fairly well in who they elect. I would think that we might have as much wisdom also then in picking people that would do a good job on this committee. And whether they have a degree in certain kinds of things or not, they may indeed have broad expertise in things. So I'm thinking council members will be wise in who they appoint.
So you would stick with your 7 and remove 2, like Jared wanted?
I wouldn't, it's not a die for just to have 7, but I do
But that's what your
need
preference.
to be spot appointing from certain fields.
Okay.
So losing the second sentence would be a higher priority.
That would be, for me, it would be.
Bill, did you have it? No, you didn't. Okay.
I'm actually seeing that there have been charter review committees in other jurisdictions with as many as 25 to 35. I was actually looking at 11 as kind of being an economic level. Reducing it below that level, I'm a little concerned.
Other comments? I guess I would definitely, I think that 11 is a good number. I also, I think that it can be difficult to have them all there at the same time, and that does then give still the ability to have a dynamic discussion if 1 or 2 are not there. We have 7 on the Planning Commission and 2 alternates, and so I think it's just 2 more than that. So I don't have a problem with the 11. And I also, I guess when I looked at B2, I thought a bit about why that would be important. And it did occur to me that the charter was written in 1959. And I don't, the gentlemen who wrote it, the citizens who wrote it are on there, and I don't know what their scholarly backgrounds were. But we don't know who we're going to pick, who each of us would select out. But I think it is important to have representation from some of those fields, just in terms of that depth, breadth that they can bring from those levels of expertise. We're looking at changing the rules by which we would live, any kind of alterations. And I think whatever they're going to bring to us, for us to either, yay or nay, they need to be able to be able to defend it. So I think that asking for some additional skill sets to be included in the choices is good. I would suggest that we may be missing some skill sets we might want to include there. Michael?
Did Bruce?
Oh.
Well, I'm comfortable taking that second sentence out, and with just the idea that the city council is going to appoint the 4 members at large. And I think the criteria that we would use in appointing them would be a cut above, as you're talking about. We'd be looking for the best and the brightest. So rather than saying shall to these fields, I'm comfortable with council just selecting them.
Council, what again?
Council just selecting the 4, not having that guidance of that second sentence.
Okay.
And I was just going to point out that the only 4 are the at-large members that have the requirement for the expertise. So the other 7 could be whomever. But it sounds like there's, if I'm counting right, there's a majority that's okay removing that second sentence.
Okay. So if we don't, it sounds at this point as though we're okay with this. There's a majority that would like to stick with the 11, and there's a majority that would like to remove that second sentence of B2.
I'm not sure I saw a majority on B2.
We have Jerry, Bruce, and Peggy. You're right.
But if you break it down into 2, I mean, removing the second sentence of that paragraph is certainly what I would like to have done.
Okay. Yeah,
Now,
let's,
whether it's 11 or 7, that's...
okay.
May I miss Jim? Jim, what was your, I apologize. You were okay keeping
Or what?
for
B2.
B2?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so we don't have a majority there.
So
We
you
have
don't have, I mean,
What are we talking, the whole paragraph or just
just
that
that
last
last sentence.
So a question in terms of process. So in the at-large would apply, and the others would just be appointed. Would there be some value in having everybody apply, and each council person could appoint, and then from the others, the whole council would pick? That way we would get to hear, because we might, in one sense, underestimate or overestimate somebody that we'd like to appoint as individuals.
Any input on that? I'm actually fine with the way this is written. Anybody?
So what is our count? How many that do want to leave in that exclusion of a lot of our citizens?
3.
3 want to leave it in?
No.
No, 4 want to leave it in.
3 want to leave the exclusion in, okay.
Yep. And then what Peggy was just suggesting was a process, I think, not a change to the language, but a process piece of how those 11 are actually picked, that they're not, that we put together an application and all 11 seats are done through an application process. if
I think it
understood
would
correctly.
change the language, though, Michael.
Do you?
Well, it
Each council member shall appoint one. It wouldn't be appointing
issue
one.
to raise before we might.
Through an application process.
Body
yes.
would.
And I have another.
No. What Peggy's suggesting, correct me if I'm wrong, Peggy, is people apply, but each council member still has single appointee power. It's just through through one of the applicants, as opposed to you picking somebody out of the 42,000 residents. To be from one of the applications.
In that sense, if I had somebody in mind that I would like to appoint, or maybe a couple, then I encourage them to apply, and I get to hear publicly answers to questions or whatever. And I have another process issue. Would the committee be having opportunity for citizens to speak at the committee, to suggest things that they see as issues?
Left it open for their process, but had assumed that there would be a public component to it.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a read on that.
Other comments?
I guess I don't see an advantage, Peggy, in having an application process. I think just slows everything down. And I think you're also suggesting we do an interview for that, and I'm not in favor of doing that either. But on the other hand, if what she suggested earlier is that I don't get a vote, because she wanted to wait till after November.
And it wasn't personal, it just happened.
But I'm the only one that's affecting Peggy.
I know, but because the council and the committee will be working with each other, and if somebody is not thinking someone's doing a good job, I would hate for anybody to be thinking that it's because somebody appointed that person or whatever. So, and it's potentially, not that I want to get rid of anybody, it's potentially affecting 3 other council people.
Well, I think we need to get a read from council if they agree with moving those decisions to the November council. And if so, then this entire discussion should move to then. Bruce?
I'm not in favor of moving it. I think there's a perceived continuity of council. You know, council inherits a lot of things from a previous council, and I don't feel a concern that the next group of council members would have negative effects from the decision of this group of council members. It just doesn't concern me.
Okay. Bruce?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this more or less occurs under our watch. I think we decide to move forward with it or not. If we decide to move forward with it for the right reasons, it's a relatively narrow project. It's a group of people looking to work a document that now is 70 years old or some such number, 50 years old, I guess. And, let's get it updated and get it in front of council. Council still got the final call in terms of what to accept, what to reject. Presumably they'll come back, and if it's not with us in the fall, and I think frankly it could be. I mean, if we start this process and get it moving along, I kind of think we could see some results on this, in the October timeframe. It's a relatively straightforward project. I don't think it needs to be. I don't think it needs to be delayed. Let's put it that way.
Other comments?
Again, so I keep hearing that it's only 3 to 4 to remove that sentence, but I want to know who wants to keep the elimination in there, because I don't hear what the 3 are.
The 3 that want to remove it are you and Peggy and Bruce Beckman.
Okay. The others want to leave it in. All right. Thank you.
Any comments on the moving this to the November election or doing it now, Jerry?
Now it's fine with me.
Bill?
Now it's fine.
Okay.
So I do have another question. Would there be any kind of conflict if we appointed someone who's running for election, even if they have not declared yet, and then they pop up?
Well, I would think if they're running and if they get on council, then they could not serve on this committee.
Why?
Because I don't think we want a council member serving on the committee. It's a citizens committee.
We're citizens too.
Yeah.
I don't see that's a problem. If somebody's running for city council and is appointed to this charter commission, I don't see that as a problem.
Anybody else?
Neither do I see it as a problem if somebody sitting on the council wants to be on the commission.
We could appoint ourselves.
Could be, because the 7 of us sitting here are the most familiar with this charter than anybody else in the room.
Okay, I'm
with the
just
exception
asking.
of an attorney or two.
I'm just asking the question.
That defeats the citizen committee, but, because we are citizens, but we, as a council member, we are appointing these people to serve, to provide us with recommendations. So I don't know how you could be on the committee making the recommendations and then on the council then the votes on those. Bruce?
I don't know. My visceral response to that is if somebody's thinking of, I kind of think you should bifurcate. I mean, I'd like to see citizens involved who can, focus on this as opposed to, if you're in a campaign mode, you got a lot of focus that's way beyond this, and I think this is a big enough job that it should be, somebody should commit to do it specifically, and if you're going to run for council, then I think you should do that and probably not do this.
So that now I have a timeline question. We can't get this on the ballot this fall. So it would seem to me that we don't really have a pressure to get them to get work completed until early next year. So might even say that they don't start work until fall. Number one, it's vacation time, but.
Jerry?
As far as the at-large member goes, at least of the candidates that I know of announced, only one would qualify to be appointed anyway, because we're eliminating everybody else.
No, just for
That
clarification.
is what that's doing.
There's 11, what's proposed is 11-member committee, 7 of which are appointed by the council members, and you can pick anybody.
The at-large is what I mentioned.
Yeah, and then the at-large is, which are the remaining 4 people, would be limited based upon the council conversation.
That's what I said. Of the candidates who have announced, only one would qualify to be an at-large appointee.
Okay.
So you guys understand what you're doing? You're eliminating a slew
No.
of people out there.
I'm confused. When you say the at-large is just the at-large for the
The ones
charter?
that we all agree to appoint.
Yeah,
Four.
that's just for the charter commission. That's not the at-large members of council.
No.
We're talking about this charter thing, I think.
Just
Yeah,
start.
okay.
Other comments? Okay. Got this all knotted up. Okay, I think there seems to be consensus for the 11. There is consensus then, or at least a majority, that want to keep section 4B2, subsection 2, as is. Now, the question that we're looking at is the restrictions or not restrictions on appointing
Can I
members.
ask another question?
I don't know, Peggy, you're messing this whole thing up. We had this all laid out, really.
So I'm assuming our process would be that we'd identify the 7 first, because then people wouldn't have to apply if they already got picked. So in terms of that second sentence for 2, if the people who were picked in the 7 have satisfied those requirements, that could open up the at-large issue.
Not what this says, though.
No, I'm just saying, I'm thinking that the idea is to have some diversity of background and specificity too.
I think we can, let's just, if you guys are okay with this, on that last sentence, change it to, change it from being a mandate to being a suggestion, to being where instead of the at-large member shall be, all attempts should be made to, or, we should,
But the 11 include, so that...
the at-large shall be educated, shall be education, this has got that draft written over it, I can't. By education, experience, or training come from the fields of law, academia, public administration, or policy. I'm saying that we adjust the word shall to be more, not a mandate, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
all
we
of
should
it may
make.
not apply, is what it's saying, though.
But Jerry, I'm trying to fix it.
that's
I'm
how
trying
I
to
read
fix
it.
it right now.
But by saying
So that
that
it-
you shall have a, that would
I'm
be
saying we take the
preferred.
shall out. So if we take the shall out, but we still use it as a recommendation that it is,
We can reword
A
it. if
preference
that's what you
that-
guys want.
because this is going to come back for us again, so if you can tweak that, and then we can look at that and see if everybody feels that's okay. In terms of, okay, Bruce.
Just one comment, we're not approving a resolution tonight, we're trying to draft something to come before us, so we'll still be able to have that debate again to Jerry's issue on the stand as we really legislate this. So I think, we'll have an opportunity to see it again.
And that's why I asked staff to change that language, bring it back, and we'll see if we like that better. If we don't, and we'll put this on the next meeting, I guess.
I do have a question then in terms of timeline. This goes even on our next meeting. It's going to be too late for the Littleton report. Would we not want this to be announced in the Littleton report before we started appointing?
We have the website and other ways of getting the information out. I mean, Bruce? Huh?
Paul's here.
Paul?
Yeah, and I don't think we should officially be trying to fill something that we haven't actually passed as a resolution. I think that's putting the cart before the horse.
Agreed.
So the only, I think, remaining issue is and I don't know if we need to continue to discuss it or how you guys want to deal with that, is what Peggy brought up about candidates.
Regarding interviews?
Appointing
Or
And
existing
she-
seated council members.
or existing seated council. Because that would require some verbiage changes in the document.
I don't have a problem with I don't think it, yes, I would say it would not be my preference to want to have seated council members in on this for the reasons the mayor outlined. I would personally be fine if we want to do some sort of an interview process with respect to the quote-unquote at-large, I suppose in some respects you sort of have to. I don't know how we can get to some consensus. I guess the question ultimately, from a practical standpoint, is if we get, for the sake of an argument, 25 or 30 applications, that's going to eat up a chunk of time to go through the interviewing process and get that done. That's just a practical issue in terms of other business we're trying to accomplish. But I think we probably need some sort of an interviewing process. I don't have an opinion yet in terms of what that should look like.
But you would prohibit seated or potential council members from sitting on the committee?
I guess personally that would be my preference. Like I said, yeah, for the reasons I elaborated, that would be my preference.
Bruce?
I agree with that. I think citizens are a special group of people, and when you move from that into the council position, you have sort of given up the opportunity to be a citizen at large. You really are now specially appointed to that council position, and I think, you carry a weight and authority you don't even realize you carry, and to bring it to a citizen group, I think, could be potentially intimidating or overwhelming. So I just think it kind of defeats what we're trying to do to get citizen input. So it would be my druther not to see that happen, but I'm not sure that we need to say that specifically here. I think.
No, I think if we did, well, what's true, do we?
Yeah, I think you might want to be clear on that, just
Yeah.
so people moving forward. It could be
Okay.
a 4B3.
Okay. Does anybody have any objection to that, not putting that in?
To those two prohibitions, I would, but
Okay. So I think any other
What is
questions?
it
That seated council or candidates, potential council, will not serve on this committee?
I'm opposed to putting that in,
That they will not.
to adding that in.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm probably opposed because I just think natural selection would take care of that, but it's not a big hang-up for me.
Okay.
Still have to prove it as a group.
But
More of them.
how would natural selection do that, if you get to appoint yourself?
Peggy could appoint herself, yes.
Well, Peggy, it may not, the natural selection may not occur for a couple of years, but I think it would occur.
Okay, any other comments on this?
So, I'm sorry, so I'm clear, are we putting it in or are we not?
I would put it in, and one reason I think it's good, number one, for the record, here it is for everybody to see.
Okay.
And one reason I would support not having council serve is they actually would get two opportunities to affect what comes forth. So everybody.
I think it should be in.
Has a voice.
Bill, where are you at?
I didn't anticipate appointing myself or.
Okay.
We can get it now, Peggy.
We're good.
Okay, put it in.
We're good.
All right,
Put it
thank
in.
you for clarification.
Okay, so let's see, now, we wrap that one up in
So we'll do
40
water.
minutes. Yeah, we'll go to item A.
I do have a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So what about the period of performance, or when we want this stuff done, at the top of page 2? I mean,
Can we, when the staff brings it back, can we take a look at a time schedule that would have dates suggested in there? Anticipating a
I
2014.
said need to fill in proposed dates, yes.
so you're going to take
Yep.
care of that, and it's coming
I'll
back
bring
next
that
when
forward.
again?
I don't
2
have.
weeks?
Yeah, probably 2 weeks. I don't have the calendar in front, but
Goodness,
yes.
the next
Yep.
regular,
Yes, the next
Probably
regular.
August 6th.
or
Yep,
two,
based on.
yeah, because next one's a special election.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking
Next
about
regular.
canceling.
No,
Oh, that's
you need
back.
to check your
it's
emails.
back on.
Oh, well.
Yeah, you
Didn't do it late enough in the day.
yeah,
Yeah, but I did make a note on that very
Yeah.
thing.
Okay.
thanks.
Okay, so 7A is a water rights presentation from Fisher, Brown, Bartlett, and Gunn. Michael?
Yep. So, council, we've been talking for probably a better part of the year about water in various fashions, and one of the things that had quickly come, I think, to Charlie Blossom's attention and mine is we did not have a single location where we had all of our water rights, and so we spoke with Dan and Sarah about pulling it together. And so we had a water portfolio that we all understood, and that we could actually go to a folder somewhere and pull it out when necessary. It's not quite as easy as that sounds. And then part of the ongoing council education, and we'll do this periodically as we have new elections, our new council members seated following elections, is we will bring Dan and Sarah in to update the new council members and educate them on what our water rights are. So we're a little delayed in this presentation, but I appreciate Dan coming and finally making it through traffic, it sounds like. And so he's here just to give an overview of this. And also, sorry, Dan, before we start, one of the things I had mentioned that we were starting to look at Kettering Lake at our last regular meeting. We've now scheduled that for a specific study session on, tentatively scheduled right now for July 23rd study session. It's a third item that evening, so we'll be talking about it then because we really don't have enough at this point to have anything comprehensive to discuss other than what I had said before, which is we are starting to look at options and evaluating. We've got some engineers that we're speaking with, and obviously Dan and Sarah are part of that. So with that preamble, it's all yours, Dan. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Michael. Good to see you all again. Sorry for being late. We got a nice early start, and so I thought I'd take a scenic drive, and I learned my lesson on that. So I apologize for being late in traffic. Before I get started, I'm Dan Brown, for those of you who I've not met, with the law firm of Fisher, Brown, Bartlett, and Gunn. We are special counsel to Littleton with regard to water rights and water matters. With me tonight is Sarah Irby, a partner of mine. She's here because she did the bulk of the work actually putting this together. What we were asked to do, I think it's roughly a year or so ago now, was, as Michael explained, was to try to pull together what it is in the way of water rights and water assets that Littleton has and do an inventory of that. It's not as easy as it might sound. You don't find water rights related things in public as easily as you find like property records and so you have to do a bit of searching. So a caveat will be is we have nailed down, I think, the bulk of the major water rights here, but this is a little bit of a work in progress. And so there may be a few things that need to be tweaked. We may discover a well here or a well there, but we think this is fairly complete at this point. Let me get started, I guess, with just a summary. Littleton has 3 broad categories of water rights as I am thinking about it. Littleton is different than the majority of cities we do work for because Littleton does not provide its own potable water supply. So many municipalities have a whole host of water assets that go to potable waters. As I understand it, prior to 1970, Littleton was served by a series of groundwater wells, and then for reasons I was in diapers, I guess, when this took place, so I don't have the background. But in the 1970s, a decision was made for Littleton to receive its potable water supply from City and County of Denver, Denver Water, and so that through agreement that has been recently updated, that is how the potable water supplies are provided. I guess by way of caveat, I don't think has been an extensive non-potable, like irrigation of parks with untreated water system in place for Littleton either. So there are not a whole ton, frankly, of water rights here. What I have is a second category of decreed water rights, is what I would sort of term as miscellaneous water rights that I'll describe. And then the third water right that we've separated out is there is a contractual right that Littleton has that I'll also talk about. Okay, so back to the first category. Littleton receives its potable water supply from City and County of Denver through what was called a total services agreement. And it's a fairly long document, but the essence of it is that Denver would become the water provider, and Littleton would give up that task, and in return, as part of that agreement, Littleton conveyed essentially all of its water rights and water infrastructure. So Denver would supply water. So that is why there is not a huge amount of just raw water assets in Littleton's inventory. Let me just make sure I'm hitting the bullet points here. There are a couple of reservations and I pulled these out of the document because that's sort of what I'm about here, is I'm trying to identify your water rights or water assets, I guess. Or this isn't really a water right, it's an agreement that you have in here in this 1970 agreement that Littleton would reserve the right to use certain water supplies from the city ditch and taro rights and a couple of wells for irrigation purposes. This is a small provision in the 1970s agreement. To my knowledge, that there hasn't been a whole lot of use of those water rights, but it is something that was reserved in the 1970 agreement. There was also an agreement that was kind of fuzzy from a lawyer's point of view, but in terms of enforceability, but there was an agreement that Denver would endeavor to continue to supply Kettering Lake with Antero rights. So those are Littleton's water assets that were retained in the total services agreement. In 2011, that total service agreement was amended, or I shouldn't say amended, it was essentially redone, and a new total service agreement was executed in 2011. It had some different terms and conditions in it. We weren't involved directly with those negotiations, but reading the document and reading between the lines, I can see the goal appears to have been for Denver to get a little more clarity in terms of some of the open-ended provisions that had been made, that they had to supply. They wanted to nail some of these things down, and Littleton got a few things in return, including some money. Notably, there is still well, I guess I'd say, I'll go through these. There's 12,000 acre feet that was retained for temporary leases to supply water for Littleton, for Denver Water, I guess, to provide areas outside of Littleton for a short-term basis. There was a reservation of 350 acre feet, and I should back up. Acre feet is a measurement of water we commonly use. It's about, I think it's 325,000 gallons. It's an amount of water that's necessary to cover an acre a foot deep. And anyway, 350 acre-feet to provide to annexed areas in the future. And then a cash contribution to help with a non-potable system for Geneva Park, and again, a commitment to continue to try to supply water to Kettering Lake with certain water rights that had formerly been owned by Littleton and conveyed to Denver Water as part of the original total services agreement. So that's the, go ahead. Yes.
Dan, with that last bullet point, are you going to explain that further?
In what way what would you like some clarification on?
The endeavor to continue to supply utilizing prior water rights.
To me, that means that they will, if they can, and the water rights are available, they will supply them. If they're unable to, they don't have to. I see that as a lawyer as a way of essentially them not making a commitment, a permanent commitment to do this, where they have to come up with affirmatively ways to make that happen if the contemplated water supplies are not available.
Well, I guess to sort of follow on with that, maybe talk a little bit more about the word endeavor. I mean, how much of an effort do they have to make, as in they're apparently not going to run the canal? So what is, all that basically says is best efforts, reasonable commercial efforts, we'll think about it?
To my knowledge, endeavor doesn't have a particular legal meaning like that you would, it's a pretty soft term, but to me, best efforts is a reasonable approximation of what that means. So I don't think they have to go out of their way or expend funds or do anything. I guess the way I'm seeing is that they don't have to take efforts beyond what has historically taken place to arrive at a different source of water or do things extraordinary or expend funds that are not customary to make this take place.
Do you guys know, I'm not familiar with the state of the Antero Reservoir, but is there water that we're entitled to in that location?
I don't believe there's any entitlement beyond this statement in this total services agreement.
Well, this says Antero contract rights, so what does that mean?
I think that means that there was an Antero contract that Littleton held prior to the 1970s water services agreement. This is one of those documents I've talked about where my little caveat. I've not seen such a document, but I'm presuming there was an ownership based on a contract that existed prior to 1970 that was conveyed to Denver, and that's a reference to that.
Okay.
When you say expend funds, if someone just merely releases a component, that's not an expenditure of funds, is it?
Release is a component of...
Turns a crank.
I don't think so. I guess I'm getting I want to be careful not to render a legal opinion on this until but I guess I can see where this is going. I'm trying to, I would think that merely doing what is customary and delivering water and them just refusing, if they're in a situation where they've historically been and there is water available and they just decide not to, I would think that would be a violation of this. If there is something has changed and they're having to do something more than normal, at least they have an argument there that they don't have to supply that water. But this is a very, I'm using the term squishy, but this is not an easy statement. You can see many angles on this, so I'm uncomfortable taking a real firm position on this because this is something that keeps lawyers busy and judges busy, statements like this and that have to be interpreted.
Just not beating it to death, but if you walk the Highline Canal that is in the city limits, you'll see other places where water would have gone into private ponds or through other irrigation ditches that are attached to the Highline. Would those people have separate rights, or would they only have rights as are applied to the city of Littleton that this sentence would apply to? Do you know?
I don't know for sure, but they very likely have different either share ownership or contractual rights or maybe wholly different water rights in that canal I'm not super familiar with this canal, but it's not uncommon that canals of this nature will have different kinds of water in them. So if someone else is receiving water in this canal, it may be a wholly different source of water that is not those sources. But regardless, they will be receiving their water right via some sort of different share ownership or contractual entitlement. Anything more on there? Or I'm going to move forward to the second category of water rights. This is sort of some miscellaneous water rights that I guess I lump them all into miscellaneous because they're sort of they're all different. But Littleton has an unusual water right that I'm sure you are all familiar with, but this is the boat chute right, as we call it, in South Platte Park. What this decree does, it was the second one ever in the state. It was a right that's fairly unusual in water law, at least to this time. I won't go through all the details of why, but getting a water right to keep water within a stream system is something that was not something you could do historically. These boat chute rights were an inroads in the 70s that allowed, under certain situations, for water to be used within the stream channel. This is one of those rights. Like I said, the second one ever obtained in the state, as I understand it, in 1994. This is the case number 94 CW 273. Littleton got the right for water flows at 3 different boat chutes within the park. The upstreammost boat chute is boat chute 10, that's just north of C470. There's one in the middle of the park, right around Mineral Avenue, and one at the end of the park, right around where Lee Gulch enters the river. What the decree allows is with this fairly junior water right, meaning it's relatively new in the way water works, is the older your water right, the better. So unfortunately, this is a fairly new water right because it came along late, so it will only yield in times when there's a fair amount of water around. But that said, it still entitles Littleton to, when this water right is in priority, to require 100 CFS at these boat chutes for boat passage. So that's one right, recreational right. And then a second category for fish habitat. And as I've broken out here, the flow rates differ depending on the time of year. There's a lesser amount during the winter time. And CFS, I went by that too fast. That's a cubic foot per second. It's a flow rate measure. So I just threw this map in here to give you a sense of a few of the structures. We'll maybe go back to that as we talk. But these boat chutes, here's boat chute 10, here's boat chute 4, and boat chute 9 that I just referred to. So moving on to another water right here, unless I'll pause if there's any questions about that right. Okay, a second right is, oh no, this is a different one than I thought. Sorry, this is a decree that we obtained in 1998. Actually, it took longer than that. It was filed in 1998 for Littleton. This is really the only water right, or potential potable water right that I'm aware of that Littleton has at this point. But this is a decree for the deep wells. You're probably familiar with that in this area of Colorado there are 4 deep aquifers. Littleton's overlying 3 of them, where you can dig, if you dig deeply enough and get these wells in these formations, you're entitled to the water out of these formations by virtue of overlying land ownership. Or in this instance, there's provisions in the law that allows Littleton as a town to effectively acquire the consent of all the landowners within Littleton, which is what was done. So based upon essentially the 7,500 acres of Littleton ownership, in 1998, we obtained a decree for roughly 970 acre-feet of water from these the Denver aquifer. Whoops, sorry. This is what these are. This is fairly small, but these aquifers are essentially, you can think of them as 4 bowls, and one on top of each other. The bowls on the bottom is the largest, and they get smaller as they go up. But the decree allows the withdrawal from all of these collectively and to the tune of about 974 acre-feet, which is a fair amount of water. This is legally unique water right in that it isn't part of the priority system, meaning it doesn't have a priority date and you don't get called out. So this is water that you can physically go get, and if the water is available, you can pump it in these amounts on average. This is an annual amount, 974 acre-feet on average annually. So, yes, sir?
So you could access one or all three of those aquifers with a single well, with multiple wells, as long as the total was 1,940 acre-feet per year. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to get into, there's two kinds of classes of water. I don't want to get bogged down in too much detail, but the kind of water that's essentially free in the sense that you don't have another obligation associated with a priority date. The non-tributary water is 974 acre-feet. I combined that all. It's different amounts in the different aquifers.
No, you're right. 974, I was reading down, I saw the 1940s. So say it's 974, but you could get that out of one well, multiple wells, whatever you chose to do,
Right.
within the confines of the city limits.
Yes.
Okay.
So the 1,940 acre-feet is, this just goes to show you how strange Colorado water law can get. It's referred to as not non-tributary water, as opposed to, so the double negative doesn't make it tributary. But for our purposes, you might as well think of it that way. You can access this. It's available to Littleton for all uses, but the pumping and use of it will require that you have other sources available to replace essentially a similar amount to the river. So it doesn't really wind up being that useful of a water right. What is useful, if it's economically obtained, is the 974 acre-feet of non-tributary water. To my knowledge, there are no wells that Littleton owns that accesses any of this water, and this decree was obtained primarily for drought protection for the city in the event that it became necessary, because there are provisions in the agreement with Denver Water that under certain extreme situations, no water could be provided to Littleton. So I think it's having that available if some catastrophic situation arose where Denver said, we can't supply you, that there was an option there. That was my understanding of why that was obtained. So.
That was 1998. So when we renegotiated our contract with Denver Water 2 years ago, does that still apply, that Denver Water would not necessarily have to provide us with any water?
That would be a situation where they simply physically didn't have it.
Well, if they had any for them, they would have some for us.
Yeah, and I think
So it would be...
I may have to defer on that precise issue. I'm not positive on that. I'm not sure if Sarah knows, but I think there would have to be a sharing that goes on.
Yeah, I'd be curious on that, because
Okay.
I understood that they'd have to provide us something.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to answer that incorrectly, so maybe I can check into that. Okay, here is these are not particularly interesting rights, frankly, but they were the only two wells we could find that were decreed in the court records that Littleton still owns. The rest of the wells that Littleton had owned, to our knowledge, were conveyed to Denver Water. These are two wells that were decreed after the 1970 agreement, which is, I think, I'm not quite sure why, but there was a decree for two wells that would irrigate 15 acres around here in the Geneva Park. I don't think they exist. I don't think they've been used. They're not very valuable. They're probably essentially valueless because to use them, they would probably cost as much to rehabilitate as to drill a new well. And we can talk about this if you have more questions, but I don't want to get bogged down here. But any well usage is going to require that these wells be in an augmentation plan, which is would require you to get essentially as much water as you're getting from the well. So the value of a well is really in the augmentation water you have for it, and Littleton doesn't have any much to supply these. But I did want to bring them up because they exist in the records. Speaking of augmentation plans, Littleton has one augmentation plan. The reason for it is because Littleton acquired the Cooley Lake property. This is right about the time that this was acquired was when the law was changing and there was a a settlement reached that was passed into statute that was sort of a compromise when it became, the law acknowledged about this time that when you dig a gravel pit and you expose groundwater, it has the same effect as a well, and the evaporation that's taking place from the surface of an exposed gravel pit is effectively depriving water from the river, and that is the sort of thing that requires that you replace a like amount to the river so people with senior old water rights are not injured by the virtue of you exposing groundwater. Well, this is a new concept in the 80s, and this compromise that was struck is if you had a gravel pit in existence prior to 1981, you didn't have to worry about this. You got under the radar, and you didn't have to augment that use or that evaporation. Post-1981, you did. So what we have here is there was, I forgot the exact number of acres, I think it's up there, 42 acres of Cooley Lake was exposed after 1981, which required that Littleton replace that evaporation to the river. And the way that was achieved was by this decree in 93 CW 11 for an augmentation plan. The source of supply, I'll talk about this next, but the city of Littleton has, by a stipulation in another court case, a right to use up to 35 acre feet of water owned by Englewood from McClellan Reservoir. And that's the water that's being used to make up this roughly 19 acre feet of evaporation that Littleton's responsible for because of the post-1981 Cooley Lake gravel or water that's been exposed. Yes, sir.
So I guess two questions with that. The difference between the 35 acre feet and call it 19 acre feet to Cooley is obviously 16. In theory, that is water that we still have a call on from McClellan that we got from Englewood, and I think that was, 94 or 96?
Yes.
But the key question there is, if we've been using the 19 for how many X years, is the 16 per year a cumulative number such that we can go back to 96 and say, we didn't call for 16 per year, so therefore you owe us for 20 years worth of, or 19 years worth of 16 acre feet per year?
Never thought of that. I'd have to go back and look to be sure, but I'm confident that wasn't the way it was contemplated because the reservoirs just aren't operated that way. You don't hold, you'd eventually overtake the whole capacity of the reservoir by not using your 35 acre feet. So in these, I guess I didn't think about it because it'd be so uncommon. These sorts of situations are annual entitlements.
Well, in a general water law sense, if you don't call for water in a given year, it's gone?
Yeah, unless you specify it into their carryover, because like I said, if you're going to, that's essentially another obligation. You're asking them, because reservoirs fill annually, and they use them annually, and you're asking essentially to hold over and maybe kind of overtake their ability to fill. You can see as your 35 acre foot pot grows, their ability to use that reservoir keeps getting smaller and smaller, and operationally that would be something they would certainly object to.
No, but I guess maybe another way to interpret it was we loaned them our 16 acre feet every year for their use, and at some point it might be nice if they gave some of it back. I guess ultimately, you don't have to answer it now, but this is going to come into play vis-a-vis the conversations later, and if you guys can sort of work through some of the contract
If it's not
issues.
annual, I'd be amazed, but.
Well, Littleton will certainly have, or I'm sorry, Englewood will certainly not view this as a cumulative. So we've got, I don't know if we want to go into that in this setting, but I can't imagine you're going to find a receptive.
You guys can take it offline, but I think it's worth looking at the contract language to see if we can make an argument that we could at least theoretically use for negotiating purposes to solve some other problems we've got. It may or may not be something that's ever come up. Okay.
What would happen if McClellan was dry? In terms of our having to deal with replacement for evaporation?
It's not addressed, but so I can't answer that. I don't think it's ever been that dry. Littleton, if that got to that situation, would call and demand the water it needs, and Englewood would respond. I don't know how they'd respond, but I certainly think that this is This is not the squishy language we talked about before. This is a 35 acre-foot entitlement based upon a settlement. Okay, so we just pretty much well talked about this, but this is that third category I started with of a right by contract or right by agreement. It's up to 35 acre-feet to be provided by Englewood, supplied. It's supposed to be supplied at the Dad Gulch South Platte confluence. Littleton is obligated per the stipulation to make demand for it annually, or it won't be, and that kind of gets to the prior question too, is it's Littleton's affirmative obligation to ask for the water. But those are the essential terms of that agreement or stipulation. And that's about the size of it in terms of what we see as assets, water assets that Littleton has control over.
Let me ask another supposition question. If we wanted to drill a well in order to fill Kettering Lake, because there's no water coming through the Highline Canal to supply that lake, it sits on the top of a hill, and there's no other way to get water into it. Would we have to augment that evaporation rights if we drilled a well to fill that lake?
Two kinds of wells. If you drilled a well that withdrew water that's considered by in the law to be tributary, meaning it belongs to the river system, you have to augment it. The deep wells I talked about, that non-tributary decree with the 970 acre-feet or whatnot, that is a different kind of water. The law does not consider tributary to the stream, so it has a different characteristic, so you can just go get that and pump that, and it is your water without restriction.
So how far away from the river would a well have to be considered not contributory to the river?
Well, it's not a distance thing. It's a question that needs to be, an engineer, the statutory standard is 1/10 of 1%. If the pumping of a well cannot impact a surface stream any more than 1/10 of 1% within 100 years in order for it to be considered non-tributary. So you have to have an engineer who specializes in this thing. If you want to claim a water right as non-tributary, other than the Denver Basin aquifers, which by statute have been declared non-tributary, you have to prove it in court, and you need to get an engineer and a groundwater hydrologist to go to court with the opinion that pumping this well will not impact the stream in the rates I just mentioned, which I can do again, but it's kind of hard.
So,
less than one.
So if we wanted to put a well in there, we'd be better off going to the deep aquifers.
I don't know if you'd be better off, but my understanding is there isn't much of an alluvium up on that hill. So if you can't physically, it becomes not a legal question, it's a physical question. If you can't get a shallow groundwater supply to fill the lake, then you can't make that work. You have to have some water up there to use. And if it's not there, your only option is to go to these, and assuming those aquifers will yield in that location. You'll need some engineering assistance with that before you make that determination.
You got that, Tim? Thank you.
But the decree we got on the three aquifers you had up there before, Denver, Arapahoe, and Laramie, those are all deep, and they're already decreed as not tributary, so we can drill them because we already have rights to them.
Right. All I'm saying is if you drill the well, they're expensive, so you don't want to put them down there and find, well, you're entitled, but we're not getting any water out of it.
Right. No,
so,
you'd obviously
yeah.
have to do the testing. Yeah, I understand that. But I mean, if the water's there, it's our water.
I just want to remind council that we are going to have a full study session on Kettering. He's got extensive continuation of the report, so we don't have all the answers yet. A lot of what we're talking about here, we'll talk about there too. So.
Okay.
I'm okay with that. Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that we are an arid state, and to pump water just for the sake of putting it into a lake that's going to evaporate, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I didn't have anything else other than to respond to your questions, so.
Any other questions?
Good job. That was great.
Thank you very much. Great information.
Thank you. You bet.
Thanks, Dan. You want to take 5? Or you want to keep moving?
Should I?
Okay.
No, I think you're set. So.
So we're going to move on to our next. item, which is the item B, residential and commercial impact. Oh, my thing on. Item B, residential and commercial impact fee discussion. And Michael, do you want to introduce on this one?
Yes, sorry.
And-
So as council is aware, we had, I don't remember how many months ago, probably about 9 months ago, we had a project come through, and previous city attorney and I looked at the code and realized that the existing public impact fee, facilities fee, didn't pass a nexus muster, and so we started down a process of determining options for updating the code relative to impact fees, which are normal within new development that comes through communities and is a standard way of receiving fees across the state, and for all I know, across the nation. So we contracted with BBC and specifically Ford Frick, who is an expert in this field, to do a preliminary review to see if it was worth going down and spending the additional dollars that it would cost to actually do the nexus study to determine what those fees are. And the primary reason for that, which I believe I stated before to the council, was we are a community, basically a build-out. And because new development is what drives those impact fees, we wanted to make sure that we weren't sending good money after that. So we did the preliminary report, and then we engaged him to do the full nexus study. So what he is here to do this evening is to talk about the results of that impact fee. And then we have a proposed ordinance which would accompany this if council deems fit that you would like to implement the impact fee, which would be on first reading for next week, July 16th. So, Ford Frick. And they're handing off the PowerPoint.
Hi, I'm Ford Frick from BBC Research and Consulting. I'm joined by my partner, Adam Orens, who was deeply involved in this process as well. Our goal here tonight is to talk a little bit about impact fees and the requirements. Impact fees are specified by law. What you can do and how you can calculate them and how they can be implemented are quite constrained. And there are Colorado statutes that deal with this, and there's a series of United States Supreme Court decisions that deal with this. So I want to talk about those kinds of constraints and opportunities, about how you can use impact fees, walk through some examples of what we calculated in our system that we've suggested for this community and why we made some of the decisions we did, and then sort of summarize what effect this will have financially for the community and the impacts on the kinds of developments you might see as a result of imposing these. Impact fees, first of all, you are familiar with impact fees. You know, for years and years, in almost every community, when you are a developer and you hook onto a water and sewer system, you pay what is sometimes called a tap fee, sometimes a capital expansion fee, sometimes a plant investment fee, but you pay a one-time fee when you join a system to recover the cost of having provided that water distribution system, that water purification plant, all of the capital facilities that allows water to be provided to your project or sewage treatment to be provided. Those are generally not called impact fees, but it is exactly the same philosophy. And in fact, impact fees were derived in the last few decades by sort of saying, well, wait, if we're recovering the cost of our capital investment for water and sewer and utilities, why are we not recovering the cost for our capital investment for other things like recreation buildings, for buildings like this, for all the other capital investments that support the community? In response to communities beginning to experiment with these fees, there were in 2002, Colorado passed enabling legislation, further defining the basis for fees and what was permissible. And in here are the kind of key points I want you to remember. A fee may be charged against new development. It's a one-time charge. When the development comes into the community, when an individual home or commercial development, it can only be used for the expansion of capital facilities. It cannot be used to recover ongoing operating costs or the repair and replacement of facilities. It's specified how it can be used. It's basically to expand facilities. So funds are available to expand facilities that deal with the impacts of new growth. Generally, the capital facilities have to have a 5-year life. So we do not charge for computers and it's sort of the larger capital items, buildings, large vehicles, those sorts of things. You may not use these fees to correct deficiencies in your capital infrastructure. You can't repair, maintain, or correct deficiencies. Now, you can begin to see already, well, what's the difference between expanding something and fixing something so it works better? And you're right that sometimes these lines get a little fuzzy, but the Colorado legislation specifically says no correction of existing deficiencies. You cannot limit these fees to one type of land use. Very often communities say, I don't really want to charge retail. I love retail. I don't want to charge retail. You have to charge all kinds of land uses that occur in the community. There must be some reasonable expectation of benefit from the people paying these fees, and there has to be accountability. You have to segregate the funds and keep track of them. Now, in addition, the Supreme Court has had a couple of decisions, generally called the Nolan and Dolan decisions, that it offers a little further interpretation of how to do this and what are some other standards. The court specifies you'll hear the term nexus. This is a nexus study. I have no idea where nexus study actually origined, because the court never says nexus study, but it does says it has to be a nexus, basically a relationship between the growth that's occurring and the facilities for which you're charging people. Not a difficult standard. The more challenging standard is the court says the fee has to be proportional to the impact of these projects. So, and luckily for us, the court also says you are not required to do this with mathematical precision, but you must demonstrate an effort, a reasonable proportionality between the fee and the requirements of that development. So those are loose standards. The courts, unfortunately, never wrote us real guidelines or specificities about how to do this. And this is sort of what we think. Basically, the court said these have to be fair. They have to be proportional. You can't overcharge people. You can't fix stuff. You can't charge them for things you want but have never sort of as a community been willing to build. They have to be reasonable. It has to be a relationship. They have to be proportional. When we looked here, we've suggested that fees could be designed and reasonably supported here for these kinds of facilities. By administrative facilities, we need the buildings that support this building and some of the public works buildings. I think you understand the fire stations and all these other facilities. There are precedent for all of these kinds of fees elsewhere in Colorado. As we begin thinking about how to calculate individual fees, and what's proportional, what's fair, we begin running into some issues like this I just want to make you aware of. You face capital needs. You have capital repair and replacement every year. There's things you'd like to fix. You have betterment. You'd like to make things better. Not all growth costs are applicable to fees, and not all capital costs are caused by growth. Repair and replacement goes on, and as we have all learned in the last 4 or 5 years, we've become acutely aware that our capital needs continue even when we stop growing. We have a desire, as all communities do, to do a better job, to sort of make our services better. It's not really growth related. We'd like to serve the community better. This seems to be a natural migration in all communities. Tends to be an expensive migration, but it's not something that you can charge new growth for. What we're looking for is expansion, and what is required is we must be talking about expanding facilities and charging only for the expansion of facilities. Our next set of issues then has to do to, all right, how do we set some standards for this? If, you know, what, if 1,000 new units come into this community, what's the cost? What are the capital requirements? How do we set standards? How do we make them applicable to all kinds of development? How do we balance a desire for accuracy against a desire for simplicity, clarity, transparency, ease of administration in these fees? What do we do with redevelopment? What do you do when you have some sort of existing project and you scrape it and build a different project? Should credits be applied? How will that work? Should we try to have geographic specificity? Should we break the community up in districts and so that funds are spent in close proximity to where growth is occurring? Should we give credit in any kind against these fees? Some communities talk about the use tax on building materials as being credit against these fees. So we have a whole lot of sort of design decisions which are basically the best judgment of the practitioners and the staff and council as to what's most suitable for this community. There are communities that are very, very aggressive in what I would call aggressive in the design of fees. They work very hard to see that all possible inclusions are there, and development pays a heftier charge, and there's just great variation in how this is actually achieved. Let me give you one of the simpler, so how do we do this? How do we start coming up with fees? Here's the fire. You have 2 fire stations to provide fire and ambulance services in the communities. You're part of a broader district, or you have cooperation with other districts, but within this community, you are largely served by 2 stations. The replacement cost of those stations is indicated here, roughly $4 or $5 million, and that is from your insurance. All of your facilities are insured, and therefore you have records of the replacement cost. There are also certain apparatus, trucks and stuff that have longer than the 5-year life and are eligible for inclusion in the fees. So we say you have about $8 million, $8.5 million of this community has that invested already in fire stations. It also turns out that you can charge our cost, the cost of doing this fee analysis can actually be charged against this. I don't know who actually determines you can do that. That's another thing the Supreme Court didn't say, but it is a very standard practice for our fees to be, so you can reimburse the general fund for the cost of our participation in this. Another complicating factor, though, which makes a great deal of sense, is you have to be careful about any indebtedness you have. Because basically what you're saying is, we have an asset here that we've paid for as an existing community, and other people are going to come in and benefit from it. We want them to pay their proportional share of that investment. Well, if you haven't paid for that investment yet, it's not fair to include it, and that you do have some outstanding debt against the fire department. So we're calculating about $8 million of investment. Yes?
That seems somewhat illogical.
Well, let's put it this way. I don't know how to make it more logical. If
we're encountering indebtedness, there's a revenue flow that's going to be paying for that indebtedness that could be future impact fees.
And all members of the community, existing and future members, will pay into that future obligation, that annual obligation in an equal manner, probably through sales and property taxes. And so the new people are not burdening it. You have not made the investment. I'm trying to set a standard here that says what is our current investment in this community, and happens to be in fire equipment and stations, that I can say is this community standard. If you haven't paid for it, if you're forcing that cost on future residents, you can't charge them up front when they come to the community and then have them repay it all again in the future as they are here.
You talked about expansion being something that you're allowed to charge for.
Yes.
Okay, and
you're allowed to spend for. You are allowed to take these funds and spend those funds on the expansion of facilities. Right now, I'm trying to set a standard. What is my standard for fire and ambulance services in this community? It's this level of investment. covering roughly 20,000 households and roughly 4 million square feet of other development. That's Littleton's fire standard in terms of capital investment. If you hadn't paid for it, it will be paid for in the future, and those people who are coming in here will be paying for it then. I can't charge them twice. So there's my $8 million. Thank you for sort of giving me the entree here. And here is sort of roughly the development that this serves. It is 90% residential development in this community, roughly 20,000 households, 19,800 further on, roughly 10% non-residential. We drew this from the assessor's records of commercial development, of all non-residential development. And so we just allocate those costs and simply divide by the number of units that exist here. And now I have a standard. I have a fire department capital investment standard. It's $366, and it is $183 per 1,000 square feet of commercial, all other development. And my position is, this is what this community has been willing to invest in. This is your standard. It's not Loveland's standard. It's not someone else's standard. This is our standard. You may desire a higher standard. You may think you've totally overinvested, but this is what you've been willing to do. This is what I can ask new members fairly and proportionally to invest in to come into this community. You need to replace your proportional segment of what we've already built for you. It's 363, so therein becomes my fire fee. I do that that's called a buy-in calculation. I think it is the firmest, it's conservative, it is, in my estimation, sort of the most clearly in line with Colorado statutes and the Supreme Court decisions about fair and proportional allocation of costs to new development. There are other ways, yes?
So if you back up one slide. So the non-residential is in per 1,000 square feet, but the residential's per unit. So that unit might be a little house of 700 square feet or a big house of 10,000 square feet.
That's correct.
And the little house might have 5 people in it, and the big house might have 2.
That is also correct, and not uncommon.
So I'm just wrapping, I hadn't picked up on that when I've studied all this other, so.
That's an interest, this comes to the allocation issue and the level of specificity. Many fee systems will look at house size and assume, I often feel without supporting data, that larger houses are more burdensome, and their fee will be graduated, so it'll be on a per square foot basis. A larger house will pay a graduated fee. So your 10,000 square foot house will pay a much higher fee than the 700 square foot house. That is a common practice. I cannot, in this community, find data, nor in interviewing your service providers do I find support for that view that the fire department struggles disproportionately serving, or in its, ambulance services are a large share of fire, a larger house than it does a smaller house. They're sort of saying, we can't tell you the variability. I think that is true. It's the same thing here. If a family comes into town and participates in public meetings and requires the clerk and planning office and administrative, does it really matter if they have 3 kids rather than 2, or does it matter whether they're in a 10,000 square foot house or a 700 square foot house? I'm arguing there is no information that leads me to believe and feel that I can comfortably make that discrimination and suggest to you to have that system, and I like the transparency, the simplicity of having a per unit charge. There are other communities have chosen to go other direction.
I wasn't necessarily objecting, I just was observing, because there are people who would argue that the much higher density developments require more resources for reasons that I won't say.
And this is actually kind of a very interesting discussion in your planning director's former community, where I think it was Chandler, Arizona, where we actually designed the impact fees, there was in the fire fees, the fire department and some others argued that smaller units in apartments required far more service on the fire department, because the fire department had to arrive at those fires with multiple trucks because of the fear of death, of the density that you subscribe. So there was some people arguing for larger fees against apartments, or at least smaller units, and lesser fees against single-family homes. On the other hand, the Apartment Owners Association had a very persuasive further argument that said, gee, if you look at the whole distribution of units across a geographic area, this actually concentrates the service demand, and in fact, response times are quicker, and you can get to fires early. Apartments tend to be sprinkled, and modern apartment codes are very protective, and they made an argument on the other side. We're looking for, the term of art is rough proportionality. We're looking for fairness, and no mathematical exactitude is required. I think this is, I like the simplicity of this. I like the ease of administration. I think it meets all of those standards, and I would suggest you stay with that. But you can have a lot of interesting arguments about how different types of land uses affect police and fire and all of the services and all the capital requirements you have. And then there's always an issue is, even if they require more or less service, does it translate into additional capital needs? Does it mean you need a bigger fire station, or does it just mean they run out more often? You need an argument for a bigger fire station. Did you get more answers? But I was anticipating, I wanted to talk about that issue at some point anyway. Street systems, as you can imagine, excuse me.
Just one more clarification then. An apartment house that has, say, 30 units in it would be 30 residential units?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. A couple of fee systems, parks can be complicated, and streets are always complicated, setting a standard for streets. And, whoops, I didn't make it to streets. We've taken a different approach here, a much more common approach that over time this has become more of a preferred approach in the streets. You can see it's very hard to calculate your investment in streets. Arterial streets, often they were built by the state. Sometimes a lot of your traffic is actually accommodated on streets. You have a lot of cross-through traffic, which means it's origined or destined somewhere outside of the community, which kind of complicates this calculation. What we're saying is you have certain intersections, certain needs in the management of your streets where you are operating during peak period at basically full capacity, at a level of F, during peak periods. That expansion of these to accommodate the growth in traffic is a justifiable fee charge to expand these intersections, turn lanes, even modernization of signalization, which allows traffic to flow more through, not repaving, not the periodic repair and replacement of streets, simply the expansion to accommodate greater demand during peak period. But everyone in the community benefits from that. It is not just growth. I can't make growth pay for all of this. They're just one of the beneficiaries. Everyone in the community benefits from street systems that are more highly functional. So we took some projections of growth and said, what share of this expense can be reasonably allocated to gross accommodation? Now, this community is not growing at a very fast rate, and you don't even anticipate, often, and most often, impact fees are employed by communities that are facing sort of dramatic growth levels. I talked about Glenn's prior community. That was growing at sort of 200% a year as a little tiny town with thousands of new units adding. And so they were building miles and miles of arterial streets. You're in a very different situation. So your gross share of this, which we're saying is we're looking at about $10 million of cost to fix these things. Only about 7.5% of that can be accommodated, can be charged, can be attributed to the traffic created by growth.
Well, go ahead and finish your thought. I wanted to maybe do a follow-on. I had a question about just streets in general, which I can ask now, or I can...
Sure, go ahead.
All right, well, if you go back to your last slide, those are identified intersections and so forth, which is fine, but what, hypothetically, what if we decided or felt like a parking structure, for example, in downtown was going to be needed because of some element of growth over some period of time? Would something like that be able to be in this computation, or would that just be something you would deal with down the road by money you've collected?
I would say that, you remember, we're setting a standard here and collecting a growth apportioned share, and it goes into a pot that can be used for the expansion of the street system, as long as all members of the community are beneficiaries. I mean, I sort of feel like the attorney is up here before saying I don't want to have a legal opinion. I haven't thought your issue all the way through, but I don't think that you can make an argument for expanding the parking in downtown, or I assume that's right, or building a parking structure someplace, and saying that all of those costs are because of the pressures of new growth. Remember, capital expansion, repair and replacement, betterment, improving things, and expansion associated with growth. Now, if you spend some time with that discussion and you looked at what are the attributes of traffic or parking that you are feel that this building is justified, there may be an expansion component to it. But my guess is what you're really doing is fixing deficiencies of parking in an area, not responding to the rather modest contribution of new growth. And I'd be very cautious, maybe 5% of that project, but you got to come up with a rationale for why growth is contributing to that. And my gut feel is I don't like that one.
Understand your comment. Is that the right location to consider this? I mean, is parking part of streets broadly?
Parking could be. Parking, I'd have to say, is such a site-specific use. Now we're beginning to get into issues, where impact fees begin to abut other exaction processes. You probably have standards for downtown retail about parking requirements. You probably have parking requirements in your subdivision ordinances. If those requirements are sufficient to where new development is fulfilling its parking obligations, I'm struggling finding where I can find room to include parking in this fee.
All right, thank you.
I believe, this is all nuanced, but the library is constrained. It is constrained in its service in part by parking. And I think under those circumstances where there is a clear nexus, a clear relationship between the parking you're talking about investing in and the capacity of this facility, that you could invest in parking at the library.
So when you waive parking requirements, how does that play a role in all that?
Wow, that's a good one. So you've waived the parking requirements, and then you come back and say, gee, well, I still don't like you spending money on parking unless you can have a very direct tie to another capital facility, the recreation department, a recreation facility. Parking requirements that make that service able to handle a larger amount of people, a larger amount of customers. If you're just doing general parking, I don't think you can attribute it to growth sufficiently. I think you're fixing a problem, at least with the lion's share of that investment.
But if by waiving parking requirements so that the footprint of the building can be a bit larger,
Well, if you waive your parking requirements and then use impact fee monies to remedy, I don't think you're keeping in the spirit or the letter of the law, but someone licensed to have that opinion should weigh in. So I have a certain amount of parking of street expansion cost that I can contribute to new growth. I then look at my residential and non-residential components and look at their peak hour generation, which is taken from the international engineers. There's a whole large book that you look at different land uses and it tells you how they contribute to peak hour. And I make, therefore, an attribution between non-residential, which contributes a little more to peak hour than residential growth. And then I say, okay, based on that, I'm going to take 34% of my cost, and so I'm going to recover that from future non-residential growth, and 2/3 of my 64%, and recover it off, or 66%, and recover it from residential growth. And that's how I'm going to set my fees. So there's my value. There's my attribution between different types of land uses, quite simplified. Here's my allocation of those costs. Here's my charges, residential, $1,500 per new unit to contribute to the expansion of street systems. Non-residential, that's, back up. 1,500 new units anticipated during this period in which the expansion is anticipated, plus 319,000 square feet of commercial. That's my divisor, and then therefore allowing me to attribute these fees. $784 per 1,000 square feet of new commercial non-residential development, 317 to residential units. And here is, so those are two examples. I didn't walk through each of them. Most of them are quite simple, much like the fire department. Here are the various fees. They vary quite a bit, largely by the amount of investment you already have in those facilities. And at the end, you can see what we're suggesting. And I think we are not stretching in any manner. I think you can feel very confident in this. $5,300 roughly of a development fee charge, and $1,800 per 1,000 square foot of commercial. And there are a couple, that's in total for each new development that comes into the community. Here are some examples of, so your single-family home's about $5,274. Just by way of example, here are some other communities and what their fees are. As I told you, they range all over the place. You would certainly be on the more moderate side, but in good company. Loveland was the first community, actually the first community in the country to devise this sort of comprehensive impact fee system. They enjoy it very much. It's sort of recreational for the city. They spend a lot of time worrying about their fees. They've gotten them quite high. But one reason, interestingly, that Loveland can justify that kind of fee is because they've been charging it for 25 years. They've been investing in their facilities and expanding them, and their standards are rising. They have now quite high capital facility standards.
So, well, to clarify that, I mean, Loveland's a nice community, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's grown like a weed. So what you just said sounded a lot like betterment as opposed to expansion.
I'm sure there are members of the development community who would agree with you that Loveland's been very liberal in its interpretation of expansion.
Well, how does that work? Well, I mean, the comparison was parking would be out of bounds, for example, but if Loveland wants to come in and do a rec center or some such thing and make it a little bit bigger, it's not a betterment, it's an expansion.
Well,
so how do I
think all I can say is this is an imperfect system that requires you to make some good faith judgments when you go to spend the money.
Okay.
And I think actually Loveland has stayed. I think if you dig into the Loveland fees, what they have really done, and one of the things I'm going to recommend here, is they have worked very hard at developing information systems that allow them to measure these capital standards. For instance, one of the things I will recommend to you is you take a hard look at your insurance, how you're valuing your assets right now. Just third party outside using your data, it strikes me that it would benefit from a little brushing off, pulling them up and saying, are we fully insured, or are we fully valuing our assets? I think Loveland has a system in place that works very hard at making sure that their capital account is well accounted for, appropriately valued, and therefore able to justify those kinds of fees. Excuse me.
What's the criterion for Collins?
Well, what do you mean?
Is it applied that a fee applies only if the unit is more than 2,000 square feet?
Fort Collins is one of the communities that has a schedule of quite a varied schedule. I mean, it has many residential sizes. It charges more for larger homes. I just picked a square footage that I felt was reasonably comparable to the mix of units that you see here in Loveland. So the fee was comparable to your fee.
On Loveland, is it possible they're generating money through the fee, let's say expanding their rec area, but also investing other money at the same time to upgrade? So they're leveraging.
It's a very good point. I think that is exactly what goes on. They segregate funds for capital repair and replacement and capital expansion, and they use those. They do projects, and they take a certain share of the project as expansion and put it in with other capital fees. But then at the end, they've raised their level. And so the next 2 years when they update, oh, look, now our standards are better, and their standards are better. You're correct. And I actually have that. Well, I'm sort of the third party who's been looking through all your data and who gets to opine, and you can ignore and go home. But I'll make a couple of observations about implementation. You must segregate these funds. You must demonstrate they're segregated. And that means not one big impact fee funds. It means fire, museum, all segregated, accruing over time. You must have a finding when you go to expend them that they are being used for expansion uses, and that can be as sort of formal and as informal as you wish to be, but you're supposed to act in good faith and demonstrate that. There's some expectation of benefit. I've never really seen this defined. There's some language in the Colorado statutes about people who are paying this should eventually receive the benefit for which they are paid. I don't know what that period is. I have seen communities actually sort of commit themselves to expenditures over a period of time, but this stuff shouldn't accrue and just sit there without ever being spent. I've mentioned before that you might consider these fees should probably be updated in 2-3 years, and you might consider trying to develop some stronger data systems that would allow someone like myself or your staff to bring a little more authority to these calculations. Look at your insurance charges. The parkland data that I got from South Suburban, I think I've been very reasonable in only charging for the improved parks systems, the sort of ball fields and that sort of things, but the data is a little imperfect. I think if we got an intern in here and Google Maps and, really work to say, hey, let's really understand what we have in our community in terms of improved parks, which includes just irrigated grassland as well as ballparks and that sort of things, you would probably find your standards would rise compared to the data I used. I have to say that many communities set aside revenues specifically for capital expansion and unrelated to growth, capital improvement, and capital repair and replacement. And it doesn't appear, I guess you don't. And I'm surprised. You are an older community. You have some older facilities. And it may be when you go to reinsure them, you find out that actually their values are not, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe you're, so it would be beneficial. You know, I'm from out of town, I think you should raise your taxes. It would be beneficial to think about capital improvement planning, what your priorities are, and where those funds are going to come from, because over time, that'll drain the quality of what you provide. And then you might consider more formalizing your capital improvements programming process. It's many, you know, what are your priorities? What are your street systems? What are all your priorities? What would you like to see get done? Have those publicly vetted so you have a formal capital improvements plan, a funding mechanism in place. Will allow these fees to be designed with greater specificity, and you know, that's just sort of good government practices that I have seen communities be more aggressive on than I have witnessed here.
When you see those, excuse me, when you see those, are they included in something like an annual budget document?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think yeah, I've showed you all the fees. Yes.
You hit on the fact that we're in an aging community. If some group came along and wanted to build a high-rise senior building to house these future elderly, 85 plus, whatever you pick a number, are you saying that we could not forego the impact fees on something like that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I should have mentioned it. No, you cannot forgive fees. You could pay those fees out of the general fund and say, this is a benefit to this community. We will subsidize, or we will support this building by taking monies from our general fund and basically reimbursing the impact fee funds. I don't think you can find different opinions on this. I think it is almost universally held that you can't violate it. You can't, because the reason is that if you start forgiving fees, then they lose their reasonable expectation of getting what they paid for. If you give away, you know, if you charge all this thing to single-family homes, and then along comes something you really like, I mean, typically the issue is retail. Well, I want to subsidize the retail because, you know, subsidize the operating funds. Well, take it out of the operating funds and subsidize it. But if you let certain land uses off, and you are required to charge all land uses by that Colorado statute, I don't see any way you can forgive it. Now, I should mention something else. You don't have to charge the full extent of these fees.
That's my second question, is can the categories of fees you had up there on that chart, can we do an impact fee on certain of those categories and not on others?
Well, I think if you just chose to take it out altogether, you would be no different than you are today. So I think the answer is yes. You could say, I don't want to charge a fee on fire. I have no expectation of fixing or improving or expanding our fire department. Don't want to charge that fee. I see no reason why that couldn't be done. Adam, is this fair to you?
You can choose which fee categories you charge.
Because lots of communities have different additional fees. I mean, we've designed affordable housing fees. I mean, there's other things.
You could choose which departments you charge them on, but you have to make sure that they're charged on all land uses. That's the requirement. But if you choose you don't want to charge it on fire, but police, other general facilities, streets, that's within the bounds of the law.
Now, I've talked to most of the head staff that lead these departments in designing these fees, and they're going to be upset if they get left out. I just want you to know. They're looking forward to having some fun.
Before.
That it?
That's it.
Are there any other questions, council?
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great information. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break and then return to discuss the retail marijuana.
Did you want to give staff direction on this?
Yes, this is all mine.
Yes.
Moving forward with the ordinance. Well, don't take it home.
Okay, the first thing we want to do is quickly go back.
Jim, hey, Jim, you could text the NSA.
Yeah. Any suggestions? Yeah.
Okay, we want to quickly go back to the conversation on the impact fees, just to give staff the move ahead. We do have a resolution at the end of that. Is that something, is there any conversation, or is council prepared to let staff move that forward to a scheduled meeting?
I do have
Peggy?
a question. If he's thinking we're undervalued in a certain way, should we be trying to do that before we would do this?
No, I would, so the staff recommendation is to move forward with a ordinance on first reading on July 16th. There is a lot of improvement that we can do around fine tuning. Ford hit one or two of the areas that he had up there, but staff is working, I would describe it as comprehensively, on fine-tuning a lot of those areas. Those things are not going to take weeks. Some of them may take weeks, but some could take a year, move us into next year. What we would propose is that we get the impact fee on the books, so we start collecting the revenue, and then as we continue to fine-tune it, we will come back as we can defend, because hopefully he said it clearly, but what the other communities have that we don't have is the historical capital improvement, the data collection to justify it. They're not doing anything different than what he articulated related to that nexus and being able to defend based upon their capital investment and growth. They're not tweaking it in any way. We have not operated in that fashion. We're moving in that direction, so we would come back to you in a year or two and propose. We have fine-tuned the data. The fees now should be X, but delaying it more likely would allow us to miss out on potential revenue than it would be beneficial. So our suggestion is that you move forward. Sorry, that was long-winded.
Any other questions or comments, Bruce?
I would be interested in seeing the ordinance, but there is a portion of it that sort of jumps in there. It's the exemption for qualified affordable housing that is beyond what we've seen today, that discussion. So it would be something I'm uncomfortable with at this point.
And you guys will have an opportunity, obviously, on first reading to tweak and make recommendations on the proposed ordinance.
Bruce?
Okay, so you sort of answered, I guess. Generally, I'm supportive of it. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag because of the eye-opener for me was when I got into this, based on the stuff you guys presented, mentally I had in my head that we were going to be able to use this explicitly for some of the maintenance, which is completely off the table, which was interesting and new information. So in that respect, it's not quite as impactful, no pun intended, as it may have been. However, I think it's worth considering on first reading, and I was going to suggest that maybe just if you guys are re-prepping this or you're going to do anything to it, there's a number of places in here where it talks about the city manager granting capital facility impact fee credits and so forth, so you may want to make it staff, just in a broad sense, unless you really do want to do it yourself.
We're trying to standardize our language with city manager or designee, so we'll make sure that we're
That's fine.
that.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm okay with it.
Okay, any other comments?
Go forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the direction.
Okay, our next item is the review of the licensing concerns regarding retail marijuana, and a couple of things on process with this. What we're going to do is we're going to go through each one. If you have any comments or questions, we'll deal with those on that particular one, and then we'll tell staff to either move forward with it or not, because it'll come back to us in ordinance. And the other caution is, and we've written it up here tonight, that we will have 3 more study sessions. One will be dealing with this in relation with retail marijuana in relation to land use. The other will be dealing with retail marijuana in relationship to the building code? What?
Home grow, actually, on the building code.
Home grow, okay. And then one on criminal and police code changes. So tonight's is specifically and exclusively limited to licensing. So if you have questions related to the other three, though, we'll have those study sessions at another time. Okay, so I will read the question, and then we'll open for discussion or comments. Does council support allowing retail marijuana establishments to operate in Littleton? Do we want to move that? We don't have to agree that we're not voting on doing that tonight. We're voting on moving that to an ordinance where we would have a first and second reading.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Moving to number 2. One moves to,
So that's, for tracking purposes, I believe we're trying to take minutes on this, so you are a no in support of.
You want to just do a rule?
Let's just go around the room.
oh,
No,
well,
I'm sorry.
okay, so we are,
Did I have that turned on?
we're in a,
I know you're in a study session. I think there's been some requests to literally track study sessions.
voting, which we aren't supposed to do at study
Well,
sessions.
you can vote in study sessions, you just can't take legal action.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Bruce has some.
Bruce,
Just the question you're asking us to respond to is not the same as the question number 1, just because you were asking if we should move it ahead to
Does-
first reading.
well, I'm asking,
And the only reason since the very beginning, I've expressed great concerns about this, and if you're asking me if I feel that retail should be in Littleton, my reason would be no, not until the federal law is revised to say that it's not a federal violation. Now, is the question, should we move it ahead to a first
Let me
reading?
rephrase.
Certainly should.
let me rephrase the question. Would council like to move forward to first reading with an ordinance that includes
Allowing marijuana
No.
establishments to operate.
Let me just, if I could, kind of package this, is these are a set of questions, as I'm sure you've read through. The primary one is a unique one, because if the answer is no, that the council wishes to prohibit retail marijuana establishments in Littleton, then we don't need to proceed with questions 2 through whatever the number is in there. So this one is unique, and then the rest of these, assuming that the answer here is yes, as the mayor runs through the rest of these, staff and legal will run through, and we will amend the relevant laws to incorporate the direction that you've provided to us. But this is a key question around, do you want them to allow? Because currently we have a moratorium, so you can have this conversation. And I've now heard 2, I think, that would prefer that they not be
Peggy,
operating.
you're yes. Bruce is no. Bruce?
Yes.
Jerry?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're a no, correct? Thank you.
Okay. On to number 2. These will be easier.
It's really easy.
And for clarification, what's written in here about...
Can you speak into your mic, please? Thank you.
Sorry. For clarification, under the staff recommendation, it talks about restrictions similar to medical marijuana. That's the location and spacing kinds of issues.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And we've got that laid in the questions.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure.
It gets deeper into, as we go through, I think we have 18 questions, 17 or 18, that will start to surface. Okay, so the second one is, does council wish to limit any of the additional 3 distinct types of retail marijuana establishments allowable by law? Retail marijuana cultivation facilities, retail marijuana production or products manufacturers, or retail marijuana testing facilities. Jim?
I want to ask a question. Assuming that we allow retail establishments, they've got to be able to bring the product in to sell. So they would still be allowed to bring the product into the city limits, even though we might prohibit these three items.
Correct. Yep. These are separate licensing, so you would be allowing, by saying yes to this, any one of these three, potentially grow facilities, manufacturing of the various edibles, or the testing of those edibles and the material itself.
So the question is, do we wish to limit any of those? Phil?
If perchance we allow for an adult use retail outlet, our current requirements on medical marijuana is that they actually have grow elements there. In the parenthetic comment when it says retail marijuana cultivation facilities, is that anything different than what we have in medical marijuana?
Yes, I'm going to look for Kristen for clarification, but I believe you're not allowed to grow within the facility. This is different than the medical marijuana, but
Right, this would be a grow facility, and it would be separate from a retail store.
Like a greenhouse?
Right.
Okay. Jim?
But if an existing medical marijuana outlet wanted to stay medical marijuana for some reason, they could still do the grow.
Well, that's one of the questions before you, is whether you want to allow then the medical marijuana to remain exactly as it is, or whether you want to allow some sort of co-location with the retail or just the retail.
Because the law does allow to have both.
yes,
They have to have separate entrances, separate exits, all like that, but they can do both. And I do not want to see
I'm
a
sorry,
prohibition on the medical.
but those are separate licensing, right? So
Absolutely.
so we're not. There's further questions down here about the separation of the licensing. But the question before you is, do you want, so the council made the decision under the medical marijuana discussion that you were not going to allow additional cultivation, manufacturers, and testing. And so what we are recommending in this is that you maintain that same level. We're not proposing in any of this, I might rue saying that, changing the medical marijuana licensing until we get to the co-location question. We're just saying that the new law 64 allows for these additional facilities relative to retail specifically, and we're suggesting that those are not licensing based on the previous council discussion that we are recommending that council support within this community.
Bruce?
I guess the background here, you basically say, prohibited optional premises cultivation, operations, outdoor cultivation, medical marijuana infused product manufacturing. I don't know that we ever addressed it. Testing to me is a lab. Maybe it isn't. I mean, part of this is, I guess it's hard to say yay or nay on this without really some sort of sense of what we're talking about. To me, if you're talking about a testing facility and it's basically a lab environment, I don't know that that gives me a lot of heartburn, because we've already got a lot of medical lab stuff in the city anyway. I'm not sure how extensive we're talking with product manufacturing, and if cultivation is, for the sake of an argument, a greenhouse that's in a zoned area where it's subject to codes. I don't know. I might, I might want to, me personally, I might be interested in limiting some of this stuff, but I guess I might need more information too.
And we'd be happy to, if council wants us to research more of these and look at what the requirements are, or limitations that you have in the licensing of them, we'll be happy to.
Bruce?
If I have a medical marijuana retail outlet, can I not have 20% grow on my premises?
Yes.
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we do a retail, whatever the new term is now, adult use, would I then, you're saying, if we do it the same, does that say that they can have 20%?
No, it is a separate license. Yeah, we're specifically talking about the adult use licensing components within the state. Sorry, Mayor.
That's okay. Jim, did you,
Well, I would agree with Mr. Stallman, what he said.
more information?
More information. Identifying and defining what each of those things are and how it would practically apply.
Okay. Okay. Everybody in agreement on that? Peggy?
Yeah, I'd like more information, but I'm inclined right now, till I get more information, to want to be able to have the manufacturers and the testing facilities, but I would like more information.
Okay. Okay, and number 3, does council wish to extend the phase-in period during which only current medical marijuana licensees may be allowed to convert to retail marijuana establishments or add a retail marijuana license to current operations beyond the state-mandated 9-month period? If so, for how long? Or B, allow changes of ownership during the phased-in period? Or C, allow changes in location during the phased-in period?
And so I think it's clear, but we're recommending, we believe that with the 4 facilities we currently have under the medical marijuana, is ample for them to have a discussion amongst themselves about whether they want to convert, and as we put in here, that no change of ownership and certainly location during that phase-in period.
Bruce?
So I'd agree with the 9 months as being state mandated, but can you talk about the staff's logic on the no changes in ownership or location?
Certainly from a location, we've had a lot of discussion around where these should be located, and 3 of them are non-conforming as it is, or would become certainly non-conforming under the retail. So leaving them alone at this point. And then ownership gets into, I think that phase-in period, the intent was, perspective is the intent was to existing folks opportunity to continue in that, not to get into the market of large-scale, single people investing in this, franchising and all of that, but let this occur. Again, only dealing with it during that 9-month period.
Okay.
Jim, and then Phil.
When does the state-mandated 9-month period end?
July 1st, let's see, state phase-in periods provide that after October 1, 2013. So 9 months after that, so July 1st.
See, I'm not in favor of that.
In terms of what? You can't make it shorter than that. You can make it longer than that.
No, I certainly wouldn't want it any longer.
Yep. So you're stuck with the state mandate of 9 months.
No problem.
Which is why we're suggesting that you stay there and not make it longer.
Phil?
I'm inclined to follow the state with regard to the phase-in period and time frame. I agree with no change in ownership during the phase-in period. I'm inclined to think that if someone is looking at a change in location but lives within constraints on where those locations can be, so that if someone is non-conforming and they choose to relocate, they would have to be into a conforming position.
Bruce?
And I support that idea that if you think the option is always there to change location in this period, with the goal being that they would have to be conforming at the new location. So I would support this with that idea that absolutely they can change location, but it would have to be a conforming location from then on.
And that's limited to R4.
Yes, sir.
Three.
Well, our 4 existing, 3 of which are non-conforming.
Okay. Okay, everybody good on that one?
You bet.
Okay. Okay, we are on 4. Does council support co-location, which is the dual use of the same location? So you'd have medical marijuana business and a retail marijuana business, and it kind of details a little on the background of what the specifics are of that. And Kristen, the state's been pretty clear on what that delineation would be.
Right, so if they're going to co-locate, they need to restrict access on the medical marijuana to those over 21, and if they don't, I mean, currently you can get medical marijuana if you're 18 and you have the card. If you want to keep that requirement of being able to serve to those between 18 and 21, they have to be distinctly separate licensed premises with separate entrances and exits, record keeping. I mean, it's basically having 2 stores right next to each other, one where the 18-year-olds can go in and one where you have to be 21.
Bruce?
Kristen, can they transfer the product sort of at the wholesale level back and forth between the 2, or is it really restricted?
I don't believe so. I think it is separately tracked and kept separate.
Council? Move it forward.
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
That one goes forward. Does council wish to limit the number of businesses allowed in any of the 4 classes of state licensing? And if so, determine how to prioritize those who would compete for the limited number of approvals?
I'm sorry, Mayor, can we step back for a second?
Step back?
Yeah, to the co-location issue. I'd just like to get the take from council on whether you would want your medical marijuana establishments, if they were co-locating, to have to bump up to 21, or whether you would be okay with 2 distinctly separate licensed premises next to each other, one serving those 18 to 21 and one serving over.
Jim?
I would go with the 2 separate ones. I think that's allowable by law. And I would, as closely as we can stay to the state, we'd be better off.
Bruce?
You guys are recommending against that.
Correct.
And again, the logic,
Primarily for ease of, I mean, there's a piece here of confirming that they truly are 2 distinct.
Yeah.
You've got, as Kristen mentioned, you've got to have a separate entrance, and you're basically doing it for the sale between medical, between 18 and 21.
all right, so you're saying
So you have the authority to make it 21.
period.
Yep.
You got to be 21 or older, and then they can use the same front door and whatever. Okay.
And
I'd probably go that way.
Yeah, and I would rather go with the 21 total for simplicity for everybody.
Yeah.
City and operation.
The issue becomes with that, Jerry, is that those people who have a medical card who are 19 years of age, are you causing them to not be able to get their product?
I'm not causing them to do anything. I'm just saying at this establishment, they can't get it there. There's plenty of places you go down Broadway, they can still go get it.
And it may be that some of our establishments choose not to convert or co-locate. So we may have 1 or 2 that remain just medical marijuana and one that co-locates and one that's just retail.
I guess part of my thought on this, Jim, too, is if we leave it at 18 for one half and 21 for another portion of the building, that I think for the operation, they have to administer that correctly.
That's right.
And we as a city are going to have to check up on them. I think there's just room for the establishments to get in trouble, unintentionally get in trouble with some of their customers, maybe drifting to another side or something like that. I would just rather leave it as simplistic as possible and leave it at 21. I don't know what percentage of business is the 18 up to 20.
I don't either. I just don't want to see them not be able to get their medication if they need it.
I got a feeling they can still medicate somewhere.
Phil?
I have a question on this. We currently have a medical marijuana license in the city, and we have a restriction on the number of those. if someone co-locates over 21, is that now going to be a new and different license, or is that going to be 2 licenses?
It would only be 2 licenses if we allowed the medical marijuana for 18 to 21, and then the separately distinctly licensed premises next door of retail.
So if they co-locate and they want to offer medical marijuana below 21, from 18 to 21.
It would be 2 licenses.
Then they're going to have 2 licenses.
And they would come before the authority at different times. It would require that we address the number, the restrictions on the number of facilities you've allowed, and I think it also impacts square footage limitations that you put in the code. You currently restrict them to 2,000 square feet, so presumably if you have a 18 to 21 MMJ or medical facility next to a retail, you could have a 2,000 square foot facility and a 2,000 square foot facility. So essentially, you have 4,000 square feet of marijuana in the same location. So I think Jerry, Councilmember Valdez hit it on the head that it would be simpler if we just limited it to 21. We don't have to then wrestle with those sorts of questions.
The question would be, do we have any input from the existing establishments as to what they're considering?
No.
We do not.
We deal with it during a public meeting, we certainly will, I suppose.
Yeah, they're going to base their consideration on probably following this conversation.
Jerry?
Now, I grew up during the days here in Colorado where we had the 3-2 bars. Remember those guys? And as well as there was 21-year-old bars. But I don't ever recall, and Bruce, you probably know a bit more about these things. You've been to more bars than anybody wearing a badge, I suppose.
Thank you for the clarification.
There's a couple of attorneys around here. I want to make sure it's clear.
That was an endorsement, I think.
But I don't recall any that shared a wall.
There have been some, not in Littleton, but in Colorado, where they have non-drinking areas and drinking areas currently, and they're just real careful about checking IDs and keeping it separate. But I think you're correct that in the same establishment, they didn't mix the 3-2 with the full strength.
I was actually in a restaurant that had a line by tape down the middle. You could have alcohol in one section and not in the other because it occupied.
Oh, I've been at places like that. I like those rules and tapes too. But again, it just seems for me for simplicity at 21.
Okay.
But in now establishment, medical marijuana can still say, no, we're just going to do the medical 18 on up. And that's a prerogative they still have.
Correct.
Okay. Jim's a no. Phil's a yes. Phil, were you a yes? On 21? 21 both. Jerry's 21. Peggy? Bruce?
21.
Bruce? Okay. Okay. And what was yours? Yes. 21. Thank you. Then does council wish to limit the number of businesses allowed in any of the 4 classes of state licensing? And if so, determine how to prioritize those who would compete for the limited number of approvals?
And I'm guessing you might want to defer this one right now until you have the discussion on the additional licenses.
Quick answer would be yes.
Yeah, the question will be, what do you want to do under, if you so choose under the additional licenses? Because it may be less than 4. You may want to limit the number of cultivation locations, testing facilities, et cetera. So we'll repose this question to you following that.
So the 4 classes were the 3 in question number 1 and retail. That makes up the 4th one.
That is correct.
Okay, so we'll put that on the hold, go to 6. Whether to establish and administer separate local licensing requirements per se, or instead depend entirely on the other laws, zoning, land use laws to enforce time, place, and manner, restrictions on retail marijuana establishments. So it goes through here. We've got restrictions on hours of operation, on-site consumption. So it's essentially applying to the retail the same regulations we've put in place for the medical. I guess I would say, does anybody want to change any of those or add anything? Kristen, any other additional?
No, I was just going to say probably the threshold question is whether we want this to actually go through a separate licensing procedure, so the licensing authority actually reviews the application, and so that they do go through that local process, which would maximize the local control over this process, so we'd recommend that.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think everybody, yes on that? Jim?
Yeah, I don't disagree, but one of the things down there about security, if an establishment is created in a strip mall, for example, you can't eliminate all the exterior walls. So I guess you have to take into consideration the location as to whether any of these security is going to be absolutely required. Because that's one you could not if it's in a strip mall, for example. You could eliminate the front and the back, but you couldn't eliminate the sides.
Well, we have that currently down with the hemp center on Main Street. Similar.
And these are your existing rules for medical marijuana, so they've worked to the extent that they haven't been an impediment, at least to my knowledge.
The last bullet under the security bullet, so the last sub-bullet, access and dispensing area is limited to patient, primary caregiver, and center personnel. We're not, the patient and primary caregiver are relevant, right?
Yep.
Yep.
And that's why it says similar to and consistent with those outlined above, not
Not
so
exactly.
When they actually write it down,
They
we'll
would
take
be
those.
similar kind of thing there. Would just be
Correct.
as appropriate then.
Yep, we just put what you have existing on there, so
Okay.
that is a good catch.
Everybody okay with that one? Bruce?
I'm okay. A lot of work went into trying to come up with the right mix here. But I do think if we're going to have the retail adult, when it's reworked, you know, I think there's an opportunity for adults to browse, to look at things. I mean, I don't think it's the medical dispensary kind of strictness I don't think it should apply to a retail establishment. The controls on purchase and all that's still there, but I think, now you're talking about a business, this is what folks in Colorado want, is similar to a liquor store, that kind of thing. So I think we need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we would customize these to retail. I think we have to keep our medical on the books and then have a matching set or a set that addresses the retail. But overall, in terms of these bullet points, do you guys feel like that we're covering the bases? I mean, do you think that there's any others that you would want to consider adding, given retail?
Well, I mean, I think the way the state has it, so just to ask for clarification on this, is on-site consumption or tasting or sampling is not permitted.
Correct. And there are limitations on the amount of quantity dispensed, which would be different than the amount that we can dispense under medical marijuana. So there would be tweaks, but it's more whether you want to cover things like just hours of operation, security measures, things like that, or whether you want to go into more detail. But this is sort of the balance you struck on medical marijuana, relying on the state for the majority of those regulations and having some local restrictions in these areas. So
The only, the one part that's pretty clear with the medical marijuana was that the dispensing It was all very secure. And so it was one person at a time. It was in a secured area. It was usually out of sight of the general shopping lobby. So with retail, as Bruce said, it's a different type of shopping experience. So any consideration for limiting the number of people in the shop at the same time, mandating, and I don't even know if this is feasible, but mandating a certain number of employees be there. You know, you can see some things, because you're not going to have that control. And if you do have the displays and you've got paraphernalia and edibles and those types of things where it's a different shop. It's not the medical. So I don't know if the state's addressed any of that, or if that's something we should look at in terms of, okay, Bruce, Peggy, Jerry.
One of the points here talks about marijuana inventory being kept and stored in secured, locked manner. I mean, I think part of this is, yeah, there's a retail presentation that you have to have. At the liquor store level, the bottles are all sealed or so forth and so on. You can't really get at the product. Same sort of thing here. I mean, either the containers have to be, if you're going to put them on shelves, they've got to be sealed so that you can't access, or if the seal's broken, then there's an issue, or it's got to be locked up. And I mean, I think if we're going that direction, that probably makes sense. I don't think you can really say how many people can be in the store at once, but somebody's got to have control over the product.
Does the state have anything on that, Kristen?
Not on things like number of people in the store, but I understand what you're saying, and we're talking about a 7-Eleven versus a pharmacy, so.
Yeah. Who did I say? Peggy, then Jerry, then Bruce.
I don't think the sellers, the store owners and the employees are going to be wanting the product walking away without getting paid for it. I don't think they're wanting to be having samples and so forth. They want to get paid for stuff. But I'm thinking they're going to be on top of this. But something else comes to my mind. It's different from a bar, but is there some way that we could require some training for people who are selling? Because in the retail mode, it's a little different from the more specialized medical marijuana. But I'm thinking about the people who come before the licensing board who have violated the age limit and selling and so forth. So I'm wondering if the state's thinking of setting up something like that, or is there something that we could do? Right, so that, to facilitate legal sales and safe sales and so forth.
Jerry?
I think as far as the samples, I don't think liquor stores do samples, do they? I don't think they do. So
They actually do now, yeah.
Now, did they have to have a special permit to do a tasting? Okay, so I don't see why this could be treated, not why it couldn't be treated.
There's no consumption
Yeah,
on.
public consumption.
Well, that's a state law.
State law.
So that's a law, okay, yes, that goes away then. But as far as then, now with liquor stores, we don't limit an unreasonable amount of customers into a store. I know we have fire codes and that kind of stuff that would limit that. But also, we don't require that they have a minimum number of staff in the store. These are business people. You know, they need to make a profit, and they're not going to let people into the store who are going to steal from them. They don't want to anyway. Then 7-Eleven, I think 7-Eleven, they do limit people, kids primarily, and I don't know if it's legal or not, but they do limit the number of kids into their store at a time, as well as leaving backpacks out. So they've taken that upon themselves to control their own loss of merchandise. So I don't see these folks being any more different than those business folks.
Bruce?
I think it's important that we don't make this like the Shane Company, the expectation of the city to the retailer that they're building a vault. That's just unreasonable. But I do think, product behind lock cabinets or whatever, there's going to be a provision for a vending machine kind of arrangement, I believe, at some point. There's going to be some things that happen. So I don't think you want to be too specific about trying to turn this into a vault. But it's a cash-only business, and it's got the opportunities for theft and those kinds of things that we definitely want to make sure we include reasonable provision to keep that from reasonably happening. And we're pretty close with this. Maybe in the medical, we had a separate dispensing area. Maybe in this, we have a way to access the retail like you would if you went into Williams Jewelers. You got to come through a locked door. Something reasonable like that.
What you said about maybe the products behind, in the locked cases, only accessible by the employee, because our experience, we can compare it to liquor all you want, but a six-pack of beer has a completely different effect on someone than 2 ounces of pot. I'm not a doctor, but I think I can say that safely. I think that our only experience with this is with the medical, and it was very tight and very locked up and very behind, and it was one patient, one at a time type thing. This is very different than that. So, and what Bruce said about locked cabinets or something like that, if that's something that would be even applicable to put in here, if the state has any considerations for that type of thing, I just think that, you hope that the business people are smart enough and they care enough about their product and that they're conscientious like that. But we had to put all these laws in here for the medical group. So, Bill.
Yeah. My expectation is going to be what folks have done with tobacco distribution. Is it's behind the counter, it's visible, they can determine what they want, and then it's handed to them in kind of the same way. The part that I haven't thought through is what happens when an adult use facility has a plant that they're selling, and that's where I don't have a parallel.
Say it again, the last part.
They have a plant.
Because they can sell
Plant.
Because they can sell.
They can sell a plant.
That's the part that when they leave the store, you have the 1 ounce or allowance, is it 1 ounce or 2 ounces?
1 ounce.
1 ounce allowance for adult use. When somebody leaves with a plant, that's the part that I haven't thought through. I don't.
What? A container for the plant?
I don't know. What rules does the state have on that?
On plants? I was just flipping through, I didn't see anything yet there's limits on the numbers and things like that.
Is
yeah.
there limits on the size of the plant?
Yeah, it has to do with the...
No, we're not taking questions from the audience.
They were going to give an answer.
Let me just look.
We'll refer with our attorney.
Give me just a minute to look.
I think you've given us, though, as she's looking for that, you've given us a vision of what you expect to come in. So we've got enough direction on that.
And it does talk about packaging, and I'm sure it involves the plants.
And if you want it in a plastic bag, there will be an additional fee. Per plant, yep. Sorry, just to put a little humor
That's for you,
into
Stallman.
Councilman Stallman, yes.
Yeah, that was real funny.
Yeah, 5 cents. 5 cents a bag extra. Okay, are we good on, staff, are you good on that?
I should have had Cheetos and brownies, yes, funny. All right.
Are you?
You want to keep going while we're waiting for?
Yeah.
Okay. Or we
Okay.
can get back if you don't find it soon, Kristen.
Thank you.
We
Yeah,
got
you
plenty to
can,
come back to council on, so.
because that whole thing has to be rewritten for retail. Does council wish to adopt counterpart local regulations addressing some or all of the same subject matter being addressed in state regulations, or instead focus on local regulations entirely on aspect of time, place, and manner that are not being regulated by the state? So specifically, this is character and background checks for the state license applicants, business operation standards, and product standards.
We do have a staff recommendation in there.
Yeah. Staff recommends adopting the limited local regulations concerning business operational standards and relying on state regs in the areas of character, background checks, product standards, consistent with the city's current medical marijuana system. Is everybody okay with that? Bruce? Phil?
Yes, I
haven't
mean,
done that in a long
part of this
time.
is I see some of this possibly being in flux over time as additional clarifications occur. And if we end up in conflict with the state, we're going to have to, it's our maintenance activity. So I would say stick our nose in where it matters.
Got it.
Okay. Okay, does council wish to establish hearing procedures and approval criteria for retail marijuana establishments? So the questions are only for retail marijuana stores or for other classes of state licensing as well?
And obviously, that one will be deferred until you...
related to the others, yeah.
You had talked about the other three licensing.
Yes.
Licenses.
Okay, mandate public hearing requirements, criteria for approval, needs and desires, reasonable requirements of the neighborhood, similar to liquor licensing or something else, and apply same approval procedures and criteria equally to existing medical marijuana licensees who seek to convert to or add a retail marijuana license.
And then what we've provided is what we currently have, and our recommendation, as is no surprise, is match that process.
And do we have anybody from licensing that can, or I guess not, Michael, we've had no concerns, no issues, there's been no snags, no problems with things?
We have not had any medical marijuana centers come before the licensing board for any violations.
It was just the original application process.
Except for the original application process. And we do backgrounds when they renew in September every year. I did want to add that there aren't neighborhood criterion right now for we did not require that for medical marijuana. And we might want to think about that.
Jim?
I would not be in favor of having a needs and desires and reasonable requirements of the neighborhood as part of the licensing for adult use of retail. I think that's above and beyond what is intended in the law.
Anybody else?
I'm in agreement with Jim.
Okay. So you're going to treat them differently than liquor, Jerry?
Sorry again?
You're going to treat them differently than liquor?
You just said not to have additional.
I would not do number C.
We do have needs and desires for liquor licensing.
But
Yeah,
not
she was
for
being a little-
medical.
I know.
I was being snarky. I was being snarky, Jerry. Okay, you got that, Michael?
Yes.
What do you have?
So is it no?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's, what I got was, no, we were not going to have a needs and desires, or that we were not going to add the neighborhood.
But everything else was okay?
Correct.
There was no, does anybody, any other concerns with that one?
No, because wouldn't the issue of the spacing and so forth, that's part of the other part we're working on, in a sense, preclude that? The distance from each other and, I mean, the rigor that we have with the spacing and so forth seems to me to take this other piece out.
Oh, the one that Jim was suggesting not be included? Yeah, that's,
I mean, that they don't seem to,
they already took it
they
out,
seem
so.
to be mutually exclusive.
Well, and just my thought on C is we're already providing, at least with regard to medical marijuana, and if we parallel some of that, a restriction on the total number. And that really displaces C in my.
Well, yeah, a lot of our existing on medical displaces a lot of this. Okay,
And 9 will get to Councilman Cole's comment.
okay. All right. Moving on to 9. Does council wish to impose space restrictions? So do we want to, I guess, simplifying this, do we want to add additional restrictions? Do we want to limit or eliminate existing restrictions? Carry forward with exactly what we've got with the medical, or come up with a completely different idea? Bruce, did you?
I like the, so I guess the answer is in part, yeah, I like what we've done. I think we have put a lot of thought into the existing restrictions. I would be fine with grandfathering in the medical marijuana centers if they convert. I'm not sure. I think you could almost make an argument that given what we've experienced from the medical dispensaries, that potentially you could almost loosen some of the restrictions, but I'm not sure I'd go there at this point. I'd like to sort of see where we end up on the adult use first. So the short story is I'd keep what we've got and I'd grandfather in the existing and move on.
Any other conflicts with that, Bruce?
I'm concerned about the federal law about closeness to schools. And I do not recall what the distance was, but I would not.
On the federal law?
From the federal. The
state law.
No, the federal law. This is a federal law about drug-free zones.
Oh,
and it puts the schools in a heck of a circumstance if they aren't complying with it, and it becomes. I'm concerned where that may go. I don't know how to address that today, but I want to put it on our radar screen that it might be something we don't see coming, and I wanted to mention it.
And that's applicable to liquor stores as well, isn't it?
I'm not aware of that. I don't know enough about it, Jerry.
But that's where they were going after people in California, I think, was the proximity to schools, if I'm remembering, last year sometime.
We can take a look at that.
Yeah, that's good. Bruce, anybody else?
This doesn't segregate if for some reason we had a testing facility or possibly allowed for some other manufacturing or retail cultivation, on whether we would want to put some spacing or number restriction on any of that.
Yeah, so 9A would be another follow-up discussion with completely different, I would anticipate completely different distances, and that'll be consistent for all our A questions.
Yeah, I think we can.
We did not anticipate you being interested in looking at these others, so we'll come back.
So in terms of the retail, is everybody okay with existing and grandfathering?
Yes.
Okay.
With consideration that each facility is going to have to deal with the federal requirements on drug-free areas.
Yeah.
Okay. Does council want to impose other location restrictions on retail marijuana establishments through zoning or otherwise, for example, by identifying specific zone districts in which retail marijuana establishments are not allowed? So it's somewhat redundant, duplicative, because I think that's how we originally established our medical ones, within certain feet of these things. So based on what we just did with 9 is 10.
I agree. What we did with 9 makes 10 obsolete.
Okay. 11. Does council wish to impose special restrictions on signs and advertising? A, we can defer to state restrictions, which, Kristen, I hope you have those. B, carry forward restrictions previously imposed on the medical marijuana centers. Or C, adopt new ones. Do you have the state ones?
I'm looking.
Ours were pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. I will say, I think that's one of the things that we nailed it, because the problems you see cropped up in other municipalities, and that's exactly what happens. And with the retail, I think it would be even more aggressive. So I would say, if anybody has any other opinion about changing what we've got, I think it works.
What do we have right now? I mean,
They cannot use, the restrictions, they cannot display, their sign cannot display the words marijuana, cannabis, or any other word or phrase commonly understood to refer to marijuana, or any graphic image of a portion of a plant or paraphernalia, or anything associated with the medicinal marijuana use, which we would convert that to the adult use. The only, Jim?
Well, if this moves forward with those types of restrictions, can an establishment advertise that they are an adult use retail site in a local publication? And how would they do that?
The state's got some regs on that.
Right now, the emergency rules say that it just says that they shall not make any false or misleading statements in any marketing or advertising materials. And then on the signage, marketing, and advertising in general, it says that they were directed to adopt rules on signage, marketing, and advertising, including but not limited to prohibition on mass market campaigns that have a high likelihood of reaching minors. And they say that they want to have a public rulemaking hearing at which interested persons may submit data, views, and arguments, and specifically they want to hear from the Department of Public Health and Environment before they implement any regulations on that.
And I would
Gotta love the state.
say that the limitations that are currently under on the medical marijuana, they'll be able to advertise just fine within that.
Without using any of that?
Marketers are nothing if but not innovative in their ability to market, so.
oh, you drive down Broadway. I love the advertisement they have myself. It's funny. They're very creative, and I like it.
Yes.
I do wonder, though, if we do this with the recreational marijuana, if we might wind up with something counterproductive in terms of the effect. This is a recreational use. I'm trying to think of the kinds of things that liquor establishments might use if they couldn't use anything that indicated they served liquor. So I'm not sure that I think it's good to totally restrict. Because I just see it different, so I'm not comfortable with that one. I thought I was, but I'm not.
No, it's changed that one.
It's one of those things where it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I would prefer to be, at least on my taste, a little more restrictive and see where it goes. But when you see a sign that advertises Johnny Walker, it doesn't say Johnny Walker 95 proof or whatever. It says Johnny Walker, or it says Johnny Walker Black. There's going to be brand issues that aren't within some of these restrictions.
I would, we keep comparing this stuff to liquor, and liquor stores, you can discuss forever whether, how they're both drugs and all of that stuff. But the reality is, liquor stores have been around for a very, very long time. We have not had retail marijuana, ever. This is the first time. So I don't think that opening the floodgates on that is something I'm comfortable with. I think that it is good for us to be cautious. It is good for us to put maybe a higher bar than the liquor stores have. If the liquor store's got a sign in the window and it's got a picture of a margarita and a bottle of Jose Cuervo next to it, that's part of the liquor culture now. That's years and years of that has worked in. We're not there with the retail, and I guess, we can always look at these in a couple of years, or if we see things start to change, and we can make those adjustments. But I think out of the gate, it behooves us to be somewhat more cautious. And I have to say, we sat in here with the school board and with middle school principals and high school principals, and they shared with us their concerns, and they asked us to be very, very deliberative in our thinking and in what we did with this. And I think anything less than what we did with medical marijuana would be doing a complete disservice to what they've asked us to do. And that continues to be a consideration for me. Bruce?
I think I agree with that. I guess to me, maybe the better model ends up being, and Phil, you said it, tobacco, because, you never see cigarette anymore,
They've outlawed most of the tobacco advertising.
Yeah. But what's more iconic than Marlboro, for example? I mean, in terms of a product brand, and everybody knows what you're buying when all they can do is put Marlboro on a sign and sit it outside the gas station, and they're selling cigarettes.
So we'll have signs that say Jamaica.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it'll end up being, or something like that. But I think, to your point, though, I think you're better off forcing people to get creative to convey the brand they're trying to get across, the brand image, as opposed to making it overt, which we tried to deal with on the medical side in terms of the leaf and the real blatant stuff. So
it hasn't hurt.
No, this hasn't hurt sales at all.
No.
Start where we are and look at it in the future.
Everybody okay on that one at this point? Because this is coming back for first reading, and we can hash it out again. Okay, are we on 14? 13.
12.
Wishful thinking.
Jerry, we were trying. Okay, to the extent a municipality establishes a local licensing and regulatory regime, what is an appropriate annual operating fee to impose upon licensed retail marijuana establishments? And we've got our current fees outlined here. Staff recommends imposing an annual operating fee, and others were applicable, similar to and consistent with medical marijuana. Jim?
I would just keep the same fees as we've got now.
Can I clarify something on this? I don't think it was quite clear. We are only authorized to collect an operating fee. The application fee, we get half from the state when they pay that application fee. So we wouldn't have our own application fees. We can only collect the operating fee. And so this is meant to cover our costs, including inspection, administration, and enforcement.
That changes a lot of that then.
What is our operating fee?
Right.
So we don't have an operating fee. We collect licensing and renewal fees,
But we also,
which I'm assuming are set up to recover those costs. So I think it would be a similar number, but it would not be related to renewal or application of licenses.
So it needs to be reworked on that section.
Jim?
but Kristen, does all these other fees that we charge now for medical, like changing the manager, location, operation plan, all of those, are they allowable under the law?
I'm not sure how that's going to work because it's different for medical marijuana versus marijuana because it starts with the state and then comes down to the local level, as opposed to with medical marijuana, they're coming in at the local level and then we're processing it and forwarding it onto the state. So presumably, I think that these fees would be imposed and collected at the state level, and some percentage would be kicked to us.
But they're not. I mean, that's just not in the regulations.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in the regulations
so far. So why can't
far.
we have those as part of our regulations, just like we do for for medical.
Because the Constitution says we can only get an operating fee to cover those costs of inspection, administration, and enforcement.
And the definition of that?
So operating fee is something intended to cover costs for administration, enforcement, and inspection.
Yeah.
We're back to the impact fee discussion.
$1 million for fire divided by...
So we should come back, Kristen, based upon that clarification with a proposed fee on first reading.
Yeah, and I do think one of the things that we did on these fees where, change of registered manager and stuff like that, that was because there was so much that legal paperwork that had to go through with these guys. So some of this stuff maybe should go away, but some of it, like for enforcement and stuff, we may want to think higher on that.
But the annual license fee right now is covering costs essentially,
It is.
right? So annual license fee could become annual operation fee.
It could. Okay, Michael, you got what you need?
Before we leave that one, I know it may fit elsewhere around home grow, but here's where the transference occurs, is taking a look at a plant permit fee.
And you had asked that question, and we're checking on whether we can even do that. So we'll have that when we get to the home grow discussion.
Okay. 13. We'll have that when we get to the home grow discussion.
Sure we will.
Whether board or council members want to allow retail marijuana businesses to exist in the municipality at all if the state defaults on its licensing and regulatory responsibility by failing to adopt necessary regulations by July 1, 2013, or failing to act on any license applications the state licensing authority receives within 90 days.
So we had crafted this prior to, so obviously the first part of that question is null at this point. So the question is solely, is the failing by the state to act on any application that they receive within the 90 days?
So the way this is set up is that the state's required to act on a license application within 90 days, and then if they don't, the city may go ahead and act on that application. And if we choose to do that, we get the entire license fee. We don't split it with the state. And then they're not subject, that licensee, if we approve that license, they're not subject to any state regulations or enforcement. Basically, the city steps into the shoes of the state. So we're recommending that we not do that.
Bruce?
This, I think, was actually something that was specifically addressed at the CML session. On this, I know like a lot of you guys were there, but yeah, I very much in favor of not allowing the state to, if they don't act, it just becomes a license. I agree with the staff recommendation on this one completely.
Everybody in on that? Okay. Yes.
Jim's not, but that's beside the point.
Jim's not, but
Yeah,
Jerry?
I guess in some regard, I don't necessarily trust the state to be quick on this stuff, and I don't support this. I would rather we do something.
The question was, earlier in our discussion, we deferred to the state requirements. So if we don't restate the state requirements, they're not subject to the state requirements, and kind of catch negative 22.
Yeah, I suppose if you did want to get on this road, we could do something where if we decide to step into the shoes here, we loop in all the state requirements on that license.
I don't want to restate all the packaging and all of those.
Yeah, and then have to enforce that to go out looking at packaging and waste disposal and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's support for this.
Jim?
Well, see, my concern is that we've got 4 establishments that we need to, if they decide to move forward into adult retail. They make the application. There will be thousands of applications come in on the very same day, and having the state, rely upon the state, to approve these within 90 days of possibly thousands of applications is not very practical. And that's why I think that we need to do something that would allow the 4 that we have to move forward if the state can't act in those 90 days.
Don't we have the option of though, just waiting till the state acts? I mean, I realize it's might be one of those things which is we may not like how quickly the state acts, but I'm not, I guess, comfortable trying to act as the state where the state hasn't acted. Can't we just wait?
Yeah, and those establishments they would still be selling under their medical marijuana license. It's not as if they would, be unable to do anything during that time period.
But that's a very limited amount, possibly, as to what it would be.
Doesn't the state have a priority or a period of time where conversion is really the only thing to be considered?
Right, they've given preference to those that already have the licenses, so I think they have a pretty good idea of how many they're going to be dealing with and staffing up for that amount of licenses that they'll have to process in those 90 days.
But that date is January 1st of 14, correct?
They file the license, they can begin filing October 1, and then the license becomes effective January 1. But it would be still contingent on local approval, which we're not under any 90-day requirement. We can take as long as we need to approve that, unless you draft those into your regulations that you want them done more quickly. We certainly have that in the medical marijuana.
Okay, so we, at this point, I think still have 6 that are okay with that. Okay. 14 is, in general, any implementing ordinance allowing retail marijuana establishments to exist should establish a civil penalties for violation of city requirements. This actually is, we're going to move this to the criminal and police code section, so that'll be, we'll discuss this one in a different session.
And when you do that, address the state maximum on fines and the, it's indexed. The fines are indexed.
Okay, so number 15, does council support implementing an ordinance allowing retail marijuana establishments to exist which, 1, clearly identify a single point of contact with whom the state licensing authority will interact to determine whether or not a particular license application or other licensing action complies with local requirements, and specify deadlines for responding to the state regarding new license approvals and other licensing actions. The current point of contact for the state licensing authority is the city clerk. Staff recommends identifying the city clerk as the point of contact, and staff also recommends deadlines for responding to the state similar to the medical marijuana. Everybody okay with that?
I would just ask, I mean, you guys are comfortable there's sufficient bandwidth to do this?
We have a staff recommendation, yes.
Part of it's maintaining our 4,
And
too.
the clerk is on board
Staying
with the
within.
staff recommendation?
Indeed, she is.
Did we check with the clerk?
Excellent.
It is a staff recommendation.
You're not under oath.
We as staff.
That's fine.
Kristen?
So I did find that the emergency rules, this is on where the sales can occur in the retail establishments. There has to be a restricted area that's clearly identified as no one under 21 can be in that area. And the restricted area has to be supervised by the owner or licensed employee when customers are present to ensure that there's only people that are 21 or over in that area. And they have to make reasonable efforts to limit the number of customers compared to the number of employees in that area. and the display of the products are only allowed in that area, and anything that's readily accessible to the customer must be supervised by employees when customers are present. So it sounds like it's probably addressing those concerns.
Okay.
I could not find the restrictions on plants, so I will get that information to you.
Okay. One of the things that we did with medical was that you couldn't even be in the location if you were under 18. So on adult, there's no restriction on the age of the person that goes into the shop.
Well,
There's
I
only
think they have to identify a restricted area, and which I'm assuming would be the shop. And
Yeah, but what if it isn't? What if it's what the hemp center did?
I don't know what the hemp center.
The hemp
They
center
have like a lobby.
has a retail area with hemp products, and then they have the medical. So if they wanted to, a store could, because with the paraphernalia and stuff like that, they could have a shopping area without.
Yeah, I think that they could do that. I think it's similar to like with liquor, where you have a licensed premises and you actually have a diagram of your premises where liquor will be sold and consumed, although you're not consuming in this case, but that you could have a portion that
Well, in a liquor store,
you can go in with your child,
Yeah,
for
you
example,
only
but you
have to be
would not
21
be
to
able to go
purchase.
in with your child.
Kid can't go in and buy a bag of ice?
A kid, no, in liquor store, I don't think a child can be in the liquor store without a parent or guardian.
those are state liquor laws.
I'm kind of picturing a place where T-shirts and hats and things like that are being sold too, so that could complicate.
I know, I guess I'm just wondering, do we want to try to restrict age?
I think the regulations do address that with there being a restricted area.
Okay.
And then I think you could set up your premises so you had an unrestricted area.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anything else on that? Okay. Then moving forward, do you guys need a break? Okay. Council protocols, we have one change I can tell you right now is under Roman numeral 2, meeting protocols, that A, it just slid down, and it should be up there in front of the first paragraph. Michael?
I didn't follow.
Do you see on,
It's just a
It's-
format.
it just,
Yeah.
it's,
So I think we've got two, in the protocols, there's two proposals on the table. Under section, the substantive one that we want to propose is under section 8, and this came from a request that the council, that I think the mayor had brought up however long ago with the council, and asked that the board and commission task force look at, looking at how we meet with how the council meets with your boards and commissions, and looking at potentially putting back liaisons. And so in section 8, council meeting with boards and commissions, what the recommendation, and I'll let the representatives from the council jump in here as well, but the two changes proposed, one is to meet at least quarterly with the planning board, and especially for the next couple of years, as they finish up, they're going to finish up the master plan, the community plan this year, and then we'll be looking at all the sub-area plans, and so there's going to be a lot of necessary interaction. So clarifying that we can meet quarterly, and obviously you can meet more often. And then the other is to reinstate, if you will, council liaisons with the Fine Arts Board, the Library Board, the Museum Board, and the Historic Preservation Board, and then articulated here at what those, what the roles are, and obviously give the council discretion that if you want to appoint to other boards and commissions in the future, you have the authority to do that. So that's A, recommendation, and then B, I think is what Councilmember, and we can come back obviously and talk about these, Councilmember Cole has suggested, and I think it makes some sense on both the protocols and the legislative rules, that non-substantive changes can be changes can be made, and we don't have any text for that, but if you're comfortable with it, we'll craft up some text, because there are, is council capitalized, is city capitalized, is the A in the wrong spot, and we just want to be, like we do for minutes, we don't want to have to bring all of that back to the council every time we find some other typo, but just have the authority to go and make those non-substantive changes. So that's actually for both of them.
Phil?
And my recollection is, I turn to the other council members, is we said semi-annual meetings with the licensing authority. So it was quarterly with the planning board, semi-annual with the licensing authority being our other.
Semi-annual means?
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
Yeah, and I left in the existing A, the council will meet with the city appointed boards at a study session at least twice per year. So.
Jim?
Just wanted to make sure
Yep.
that was our conscious decision on that.
On B, when we put shall in there, it means we're absolutely going to do it. What if one of these boards says, we really don't want a council liaison, that you are too much of an interference with what goes on, and we just soon not have you there? So can we put, after shall appoint, when requested?
I think the conversation from and again, I'll look to these guys, was you're not, the council's in charge. You create a board or commission to facilitate and assist public policy discussion and have recommendations that come back to you. And so it wasn't at the will or at the interest of the particular board. I think changing the shall to may and giving the council as much discretion actually makes some sense, because as Councilmember Cole and I have continued to debate over here, the more you put the rules in here and the shalls, the more you box yourself into corners. So I at least from the conversation we have, would say you don't want to, as requested, but if you giving yourselves discretion, change it to may.
I would prefer that.
I'll
Well, it says
look at
may.
these others.
And it says shall.
No, it says me.
Shall appoint a council liaison.
It says
And
shall.
may, at its sole discretion, choose to appoint liaisons to other boards.
I would also suggest that we change, the council will meet quarterly with the planning board also. May meet, because they're, without a doubt, if we need to meet, then we'll do it. And if we need to meet more than quarterly, we'll do it. But if we don't, then we're mandated here to meet quarterly, whether we need to or not. On the planning board.
Well,
Can we get clarification on the first one?
Okay, shall we say may?
That's probably a very good point, because you calculate how many times you're going to be meeting per month. If you're doing twice a month with all the boards, and we've got 10 of them or 11 of them?
Well, they're only recommending 4, right?
That's not what it says.
Fine arts, library,
No,
museums.
on A, I'm talking on A.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the current language is will.
If
Which is
you're doing
essentially
twice a
shall.
year with 10 or 11, 12 boards we've got, and then
Okay.
quarterly with the planning board, folks, there ain't enough time to get all that done in a year.
Sleep is overrated.
The other option you've got is to combine the boards with their meetings. You could do that and meet that criteria. But
Well-
otherwise, you can't fulfill that, number A.
It does say, or on an as-needed basis as requested by the Board of Commission or the City Council. So
Get rid of twice.
I would say, I would say meet at least once per year or on an as-needed basis. And this is all under A. And then where it says the council will meet quarterly, the council may meet quarterly with the planning board. And then under B, is everybody okay with changing the shalls to mays where appropriate?
Yes.
With our intended purpose? Bruce?
Just back to the first part of the discussion, now, the only thing that I think we were talking about was we were going from a possible request for a liaison on a monthly basis to something else. And so this was the something else. And it didn't go to once a year. The something else alternative was twice a year, just because we weren't doing it monthly. That was the rationale for that, was to find an alternative.
So you were saying, to meet with council twice a year versus liaisons?
Versus a liaison every month. I'm just showing that out so you know what the thought process was.
Okay. Jim?
Well, why don't you look at number A and just say, to elevate the communication between individual boards and council and to even the flow of information, the council will meet with city-appointed boards at a study session on as-needed basis, if you want to. And as-needed basis would cover both sides. If we need it, they need it.
Mm-hmm.
So you leave out part of that verbiage in there. At least twice per year, you leave that out. Frankly, I'd just stop at the study session and let it go at that.
I think I would say boards at a study session annually or on an as-needed basis. I think there needs to be some,
I agree. That
some
sounds good.
time block.
Yeah.
Okay, put the annual in there, but take the other out. Okay, you good on that? Everybody good on that?
And
Okay.
And are folks good on both proposed, the protocols and the legislative rules having the non-substantive changes? We'll just put that
Yeah,
language in as
you
well.
guys good with that?
Okay, thank you.
I do think, though, on that, if there would be a way to send us a revision with it marked up so we see what was done. We don't need to have a debate and discussion over it, but I would.
As long as no comments are allowed.
Jim?
I disagree with that, Michael, but
We all do.
at some point in time, previously, we had talked about creating an Economic Development Advisory Committee. Are we going to talk about that at some point in time?
No.
It wasn't on the agenda this evening.
You talking about the act type thing?
I'm talking about an advisory committee for Denise Stevens.
Similar to the B Act?
Yeah.
Are you thinking?
It could be.
Yeah,
It could be
exactly.
formatted
Yeah,
differently.
I said that a while back, too. I like to have something, whether it's, doesn't have to be the same.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody did bring it up, I remember.
Yeah, I brought it up.
Well,
It's
that,
on
why
there.
don't we put that on the study session coming?
If somebody's, yep.
Okay, 'cause
If
that
that's
would-
something that you'd like us to look into, we can come back with a proposal.
Yeah, because that's going to take some discussion with Denise and her team, too, as to where their needs are and that type of thing, so.
Well, it
okay.
definitely need to be different than what it was, because Chris did all the work and did everything.
Yeah,
before.
and
It
our
definitely should
needs
not
are
be.
different now, too.
That's
so-
right. And
Yeah.
so I think something like that can be very successful. It works in other cities.
Okay.
Why wouldn't it work here?
Okay. Okay, cool.
Legislative
And
rules.
we're okay, yeah. All
Right.
right,
So in legislative rules,
we're on to legislative, guys.
sorry.
So on
Peggy?
both of the protocols and the rules, I think both of these should be run past the council after the election also.
Yeah,
Just as a,
we'll be doing goals and objectives, legislative, every new council will be
Get to scrub it.
scrubbing it again, yes.
and then I do want to, well, you're going to make the change about the non-substantive
Yep.
piece in both.
Yep.
So, because in the rules, it would be an amendment, I think, to 2I would be where that.
I haven't even looked at where, but yes, and this will still have to come back to you one more time to allow that.
After you do it, why don't you run it by Peggy? Right, Peggy? Yeah.
She's the council designee to the non-substantive changes.
He works for me. That works.
All right, moving on. So on Section 5 in the legislative rules, this has come, I think we've been pretty clear. So the original intent when council approved the Section 5 legislative versus quasi-judicial hearings, council added a public hearing on first reading for legislative action. As council is well aware, that has created a lot of confusion by the general public, that comes in and doesn't have an understanding, nor probably has an interest in understanding the difference between a legislative and quasi-judicial action. And we had a classic example, I think, last week when we had 3 first readings, one of which did not have a public hearing and the other 2 did have public hearings. And when we originally did this, I think it was the council's intent to go to the voters, because this would be a charter amendment, to have the first reading be a public hearing as opposed to what's currently in the charter is a second public hearing. A second reading is when the public hearing. So what we're suggesting is to go back to the norm of what most communities do, and certainly is what within our charter describes, which is that on both legislative and quasi-judicial, that there will be the public hearing is held on second reading. The first reading is where it's introduced by the staff, and there's clarifying questions solely between the council and the staff. And obviously, if there's a need for a third reading or fourth reading, those types of things, that's always been part of that process. Jim?
Well, going back a few years, all of our first readings were always on the consent agenda. And that then when you got to the second reading, all the questions that everybody would have comes as part of the public hearing process. That the staff doesn't make a presentation to us on first reading, that all that presentation is made on the second reading. That short circuits an awful lot of time on first reading that you don't really need to be doing. Just put first readings on the consent agenda, because all it's doing is, as we did last week, we set the hearing date. That's all we did. And that's the way we used to do all first readings.
And the first readings, the intent is just to let the public
know that we're having a public meeting and that we follow all the rules and regulations of publication, everything we got to do for first reading. That's all taken care of because we've set the publication, the public hearing date. And then all of our comments and everything, staff presentation and everything is done on the second reading.
Right. That's what I mean. The first reading is just to tell the public,
it's on the
this
consent,
is on the
consent
charts, here it goes.
So just to separate the conversation, council is good with the proposed change in 5, because what Jim's suggesting is a procedural piece that's not a written but more of a process component about whether or not staff makes a presentation. And I would argue that there's a benefit in staff making that presentation and getting those initial questions from the council so that we understand. But that's one that's fluid. It can be driven by the particular seated mayor on whether that individual wants a presentation or not, or wants it on consent. I'm open either way. I just think that there is a benefit from us making that presentation and getting those initial comments, because then we can incorporate the response to those questions in the second reading, and hopefully we've short-circuited by taking a little bit of time at the front end. But again, your call.
My question to that, real quickly, would just be, how deep would staff go in a presentation, and how deep would our questions go?
That would be managed by the seated mayor who's managing that meeting, and we would, and it would be dependent to the extent on
because
what the issue
we're
is.
not hearing from the applicant, we're hearing from staff. I mean, I don't know that.
It would be
I think if it stays at a level of the presentation and doesn't go deeper than that, then it would be appropriate. But to go much deeper than that without the public hearing, without the applicant there, we could be getting into.
Exactly, because what would you do on Broadstone last Tuesday night? What kind of staff report would they have done without the public having an input, without the developer having input into that? I think Debbie's right. That's dangerous ground we're treading on.
Well, and if we take that as a particular example, the legal notice that went out overstated what we accomplished on the hearing. If I deal with the whereases, it says, whereas the City Council considered evidence and testimony concerning the proposed rezoning. And it also has a prior whereas, whereas the City Council desires to approve the general plan development. And I'm not sure we necessarily got to those points. In fact, I might argue otherwise on those. And so the legal notice is really an overstatement.
I think it's helpful to get a council communication at that first time, and also to get the maps and the documents and any of those kinds of items, which then if the council communication is just introduced, that is testimony and the documents are the evidence, and it would meet the whereas and wherefores. But I think it would give us the opportunity to begin to study up, and if there's a question about what the map is or what the document is, just because it's not clear, it gets answered, but not to go any deeper than that.
Do you guys think it should stay on consent, and if we have questions, we pull it, or do you want it under a first reading category on the agenda?
I prefer first reading.
First reading category and not a consent, okay? Bruce?
I would too. I think
Okay.
inevitably with this kind of stuff, you're going to get it pulled anyway.
Okay.
And we are required to read it by title, by the charter, and have copies available. And if you put it on the consent, it messes with the whole mojo of the consent. If somebody has to stop and read the title and all of that.
We have done that, though. We mess with Mojo all night long, Wendy. What you worrying about?
I was just trying to help
Okay.
you with your mojo.
No, I think that's fair. We'll put them under, and then that also, I think, calls it out more for the public, too.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. We're good on that?
Good.
Good on these changes on A and B?
I didn't close up, but my computer died, so.
Oh, you,
We took that
share, Phil, share.
Yeah, that's what I need.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to suggest, though, on VC is to actually remove that, because we do cover that in our protocols under 2C quite thoroughly. So it's a redundancy which we're trying to keep eliminated. Okay. Okay, Michael?
So just completely remove C?
Yeah,
5C.
because we've got it covered. And, yeah. Then the other thing, which I wanted to suggest, is on 2, Roman numeral 2, this will be your page 2 also.
Before we leave C,
Yes.
I have a suggestion that on any agenda that we designate whether it's quasi-judicial or legislative and include that right in the agenda.
On the public hearing?
I think it talks about the quality of what's going to be proceeding in the question, whether it's a narrow question that often occurs in quasi-judicial or whether it's an open question that's there on legislative. Or more open, I should say.
Thoughts, council?
See the need for doing that, Phil.
It's a hot button. It's going to be a hot button regardless.
And I'm not,
That's my.
okay. Okay, sorry, Phil.
Well, the council communication could clarify what council's being asked to do, as sometimes is said in the public comments from staff, right? So just.
Well, it usually does.
I know.
And we know,
But I'm just saying, I think that takes care
okay,
of that issue.
just include,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, the other thing was on, under council meetings, Roman numeral 2G, order of agenda. It says the agenda for regular and special meetings may be organized as follows, and that's maybe, so it's not mandatory. What I would suggest we do is take council reports and move them to the end of the meeting again. I think the intention, when I originally wanted to get those moved up, was to get them shortened. That certainly hasn't worked. But I also think what's happening is that when we do have meetings where we have a number of public hearings, or we've got a large public hearing, or we've got a number of public comments, those types of things, that our council reports can go, they've gone as long as an hour and 15 minutes. So, and people start leaving around 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I think that in order to kind of keep the real agenda moving, that it would be a good idea to put the reports at the end. Jim?
And one of the other reasons why we did that is so that our reports would be made before citizen comments. So if they wanted to talk about something we talked about in our report, they could do so. That has rarely happened.
Right.
And so another reason to move it to
Yeah.
later.
So, I would just suggest, too, that we are going to move them to the end, but, let's be cognizant of what hour we're getting to, and if some of the information that you guys want to share in your reports can move to another meeting, that would be appropriate. It's not wanting to have the information, it's just being aware. Thank you. Because,
So the other...
late is late.
If we move it, we don't have staff who are there to do presentations, whatever, having to wait an hour before they're part of the agenda.
Cool. Okay, anything else? This agenda is complete. Good. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
We made it more time than I thought we would tonight.
I know, before 10.
It's because you didn't have access to your